Hey, what's up, Jack? How's it going?
Not a whole
I
lot.
don't,
Killing
The
zombies.
ways of the old
I don't think
world.
we've had
They will
a chance to
continue.
talk outside of that panel. Maybe we're on like a couple of panels together, but like
Yeah, like
not like
We are
direct talk.
grateful.
like a lot
Holy
of
shit,
the
that dude looked like Lyle.
yeah, like a lot of the I think we've been on a few of the open panels together, and that
At least
those
we
can
know
be
this
kind of
chosen
big
can be killed.
clusterfucks.
Well,
Same look of
temporarily.
clusterfucks. I actually hate them. It's not. I get really frustrated if I don't get to say what I need to say at the time I need to say it, and when people start talking over me, I'm just like, "Hey, fuck you." Um, and when somebody goes on like a half-hour long fucking diatribe and like Gish gallops out like 10 points, all of which are like very easily provably false, and won't and just won't stop, like I'm just like, holy fucking shit. And then the whole panel just lets them get away with it because they're like, oh, that guy just talked a whole load of shit, so we're gonna go off and talk about our own. Like, you gotta address it. You can't let people say that shit. Holy fuck, no, it's so dumb. No, it's dumb, it's wrong, it's dangerous.
Please make it stop.
Yeah. um so yeah, hi, can your chat can hear me, I guess.
Yeah, they can hear you.
Yeah.
I need to I just realized I need to balance the audio a little bit, so give me one
That's all right.
second.
I'll keep talking and you can work out what's going on and blah blah
Yeah.
blah blah blah, so that everybody can hear me just fine. Everything's good, loud and clear.
Okay,
Fantastic.
chat, I just rebalanced quite a bit, so the game should be very quiet now, but now you can hear Mix Vivian Wulf much better.
Ah, that's pretty great.
There we
Because
go.
like, who wants to hear fucking game sounds when you can hear me instead? And my
Exactly.
fucking whiny, nasally British voice.
Look, it's not your fault that you were born British, okay? Don't beat yourself up for it.
I'll take over American any day. Let's be fair, we're both scraping the bottom of the barrel. So.
Oh, true, true. There are much better places you could be from.
Take me away to Scandinavia. Let's go.
True. I don't understand why my ancestors abandoned Sweden. Seems like a poor choice in retrospect.
I'm gonna go to Sweden. No, not Sweden. Go to Finland and learn Finnish. But it has to be like, what is it, the northeastern dialect, so that I can learn the Leak song. Because that thing's so hard to learn.
Oh gosh. So yeah, what's up? How's your day going?
Oh, I'm just bored as shit. Like, I wake up like, let me see, like 6 hours, 7 hours ago or something. My sleeping pattern's all kinds of fucked up because most of the stuff I do with Americans. So,
Yeah,
but then
what's
every once in a while I have a night off, which means that, like, you know, nobody in my country's awake and I am.
I've been learning from the Brit bongers in my community that there's like a I'm not entirely sure, but it seems like in the online politics space, there's not a ton of like people who specialize in like British politics. Not entirely sure why that is.
Yeah, that's true, and I think it's because the vast majority of our audience is American. Like, the other British people I know on this platform, I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I think it's like Chud Logic, obviously, Danabo, but Danabo lives in like, is it Arkansas? I think he lives in Arkansas.
How does someone from the UK wind up in Arkansas?
I don't know. Danabo's weird, right? Um, and he's not like super well informed when it comes to British politics anyway. I like Danabo, he's a good dude, but my god, is he frustrating to argue with. And $27, like the Scottish dude, and like, I can't say much about Danabo's content because I don't really watch it all that much. But $27 and Chud Logic, like, they talk mostly about America centric kind of things, you know. Chud
Yeah,
will talk about British issues every once in a while, so all $27, but it's like, it's a slice of the content rather than the focus, you know.
gotcha.
And it's just because the audience, like, I don't think you would get as many viewers if you're talking about British politics all the time. Um, I have to admit to being somewhat out of the loop when it comes to British politics. I probably know more about American politics than British politics at this point in time. I was keeping up, but it's just, I don't know. It's been a very, very long fight over Brexit. And then, um, once we got to the point where we're like, okay, Brexit is pretty much definitely happening. It's almost definitely going to be a no deal. We might get a deal. That'll be nice news if it comes. But apart from that, what is there to get excited about right now? Like,
Right.
not a lot, I'll re-engage before the next election, but oh, excuse me. I don't know what happened there.
It's all good. All good. Are you okay?
Yeah, no, I'm fine. I had like one of those weird kind of like half hiccup, half burps, and then choked.
I gotcha.
Just everything happened all at once. My body's just like, what are you doing? But yeah. So shit, yeah, and honestly, British politics pretty dull and boring.
Is it more interesting for you to talk about American politics?
Well, me personally, I mean, I talk about politics as sort of a side from what I usually talk about, which is like cults and political extremism and stuff.
Oh, do you know the
I
people
don't know.
over at Echoplex Media?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're cool peoples. I don't actually have like a huge amount of contact with them, but like Dave DMs me stuff sometimes, and
Neat.
yeah, they're cool people, all mutuals and stuff. But yeah, no, I've just been like arse deep in QAnon forever, and if you're arse deep in QAnon, like you pretty much have to know American politics because it's all very, very America centric. Well, I mean, at least it is in America. Obviously, it's kind of internationalized now, and it's spreading, and it's got all its own little circles and stuff. But
Yeah. Do you want to kind of go into like QAnon and like what it is? Because like I think people have
sure,
a
I'm
vague
always happy to talk about QAnon. Not enough people talk about QAnon, I think.
because I feel like
But
people have a vague idea of what it is, but like
yeah,
don't actually know how like batshit it gets.
yeah, no, I mean it is absolutely batshit. Disclaimer at the beginning. Obviously, we'll go in. Obviously, we'll probably end up talking about some real batshit stuff, and some of it is hilarious. But I always like to say this at some point in a conversation when I'm talking about QAnon. We have to keep in mind that behind all the hilarity and the freak show of it and everything, there are actual people who are, who are having their families broken up by these beliefs, who've like lost their mums or dads or brothers or sisters or aunts or uncles or whatever, and just don't speak to them anymore because they're just absolutely obsessed with these things. So yeah, it's it can be a bit of a freak show, but at the same time, I think I don't think enough people take it seriously.
Yeah, I was watching like the Rudy Giuliani thing, and I think one of the ladies on the press conference that was just a few days ago is like a major QAnon person, or she comes at least from kind of that
Do you
similar.
mean Sidney Powell?
Yeah.
Sidney Powell is the lawyer to Michael Flynn.
Okay.
And General Michael Flynn is like this huge figure within the QAnon movement. I mean, it's hard to say whether he believes any of it, but he certainly acts like he does.
Okay.
And the Q people in the US kind of revere him. So yeah, and she's a batshit crazy QAnon lawyer. I mean, she had that whole interview with like Newsmax where she started talking about like the Dominion voting machines thing.
Yeah.
The Dominion voting machines thing is really, really interesting because it comes from, well, it doesn't specifically come from there, but like, oh shit, how to do the history of the Dominion voting machines conspiracy.
But like I just real quick
Yeah.
before you dive into
No,
it.
no worries.
It was one of those things where like I was watching that and like that whole press conference is objectively hilarious, but
Mm.
also like underneath that, like it's really terrifying, right? Because these people are just living in a completely different reality, and like
Yeah,
I'm not
yeah.
sure how to reach them. Like I want to be
And it
able to
is
reach
about
these
that. It's
people.
about different realities. I
Yeah.
talk about different realities a lot. So you've definitely hit it bang on the head there. Um, like when people I don't know, I feel like I said something like this on the panel the other night, but like uh when you're trying to address like fringe beliefs that people have, like 5G towers cause COVID, or
Mm-hmm.
like I don't know, Bill Gates is trying to put microchips in us because of the vaccines, and it's very, very difficult to address those kind of fringe beliefs because they're not they're kind of impervious to evidence. These things
Right.
have to be true because they are logical, they follow on logically from other core beliefs that people have. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So it's impossible for them to not be true. So any kind of
Yeah.
information you present them, you're not going to convince them otherwise.
Like
You have to attack those kind of core beliefs.
I saw someone on Twitter the other day. It was like part of like the MAGA cope. It's just like, we know that Donald Trump is popular, therefore he could not have lost.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah, Donald Trump losing is like one of those things again.
yeah.
Like there's no way Donald Trump lost the election.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if Biden ends up president, it's because the Democrats stole it because Trump is so undeniably popular.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. There's nothing weird about Trump. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But I think it's really important to sort of understand that these are the realities that people live in.
Mm-hmm.
You know, um, I think if you're ever interested in like extremism and cults, a person that's definitely worth listening to is Robert J. Lifton. He's uh, what does he call himself? Like a psycho historian, I think he calls himself. Um, but he's an old ass dude. He's been at this for a long time, and he's been studying. He sort of started out, I think, like studying Nazi concentration camp doctors,
Okay.
um, and the idea of like how somebody who like joins their profession in order to help and heal people can go from that to like essentially being the front line in committing genocide, right,
Right.
or torture or what have you. Um, and the kind of the psychological changes or the psychological reality that people kind of live in order to be able to do these things that seem contradictory to their nature.
Right.
Yeah.
So, oh,
And he talks a lot about different realities as well, and I think sorry.
oh no no no. I'm
Everything
just
you say, I've just got like a tangent. I could just like waffle for like half an hour on.
but like I guess like how do we like reach these people? Like
How do I reach
is there a way to
these
reach them? Like is that part of the fascination of like looking into these movements?
um I mean, ultimately, that's the question that everybody asks, right? It's
Right.
like, oh, my grand started getting into this QAnon shit. How do I convince her that it's bullshit? How do I stop her going down this massive rabbit hole and like losing her last years to nonsense? And it's a really, really difficult thing to do. I mean, I've been involved in several different projects around de-radicalization from like white supremacist groups and so on. And they function in a very kind of cultic fashion as well. And it's very difficult to sort of reach into one of these groups and pull somebody out, you know?
Yeah.
Like that usually results in some kind of in a lot of pushback, and possibly that person isolating themselves from you. If it's a family member, if it's somebody you care about, you'll be sort of worsening your relationship with them by pushing against it. A lot of folks in counter extremism compare like cultic membership to like an abusive relationship,
Mm-hmm.
you know. If you go to one of your friends who's like getting beaten up by a boyfriend or whatever, and you're like, this guy's trash, you need to fucking leave him, there's a fair chance that could result in them separating themselves from you and therefore you having no further input in their lives. Which is obviously not something you want for an abusive relationship, and it's probably not something you want if you're trying to drag somebody out of a cult.
Right.
The problem is the part where it's different is that people in abusive relationships don't usually recruit other people into their relationship, you know.
Right.
And they're not likely to go out and harm other people in pursuit of, you know, what that relationship has made them believe. And so with cultic groups, it's like even more important that you sort of you have to sort of toe this line between making sure that people know that there is a way out, so that, you know, if something significant changes in their life and they start having doubts or whatever, there are places they can go, you know. They don't feel isolated completely from society, like, you know, they'll lose absolutely everything if they lose this group. But at the same time, you can't help them, you know.
Right.
You could be helping their ability to recruit and their ability to harm other people. One of the people that I talk about a little bit, everybody gets really pissed off at me for shit talking, basically,
Yeah.
is Daryl Davis. And Daryl Davis is an interesting example. I don't know if you've heard of him,
No.
but just for like chat's benefit, Daryl Davis is the black blues musician who like hangs out with KKK members. There's like a whole Vice documentary on him. There's a whole load of news articles and stuff that claim that he's managed to convince a whole bunch of Klansmen to give up their robes.
Oh yeah, that guy. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that I would like how many Klansmen he's convinced to give up their robes, and whether giving up their robes means actually leaving white power. That's all very much disputed. But the reason I bring him up is so there was a KKK Grand Wizard who fired his gun at Charlottesville. I think he was a Grand Wizard, Grand Magister. I don't know. They have silly names. It was one of those anyway. The leader of a local chapter fired his gun at Charlottesville, and Daryl Davis posted his bail. He posted his bail, and he stood up in court and gave character witness for him as well. Told the judge how he'd given this guy's daughter away at her wedding. How they sat down, they had dinner, and they ate together. Yeah, and he essentially helped get this guy back out on the streets after he'd committed, you know, a violent act, in the name of the ideology that he obviously follows, you know.
Right.
And that is an example of what I would say is like, you know, he made friends with this dude. He wanted to help him out, you know.
Yeah.
And you just can't do that. I think, like, first and foremost, I think it has to be harm prevention. You have to be like the focus. There are a bunch of different groups that will help people get out of movements, but only if those people go to them. And I think that the focus on fighting these kinds of groups has to be on disrupting their ability to organize and recruit. And that goes for like white power all the way to like QAnon or whatever you're talking about, really. I think, yeah, the focus has to ultimately be on stopping their ability to get more people involved in their movement, and stopping their ability to enact harm upon others if that's part of their goals.
How so can you go into kind of like how does QAnon go from being like a rando on 4chan posting something that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to being like an actual cult movement, right? Like how does that happen? Because like again, anyone can this has been something that's always bothered me. Like anyone can go on 4chan and post anything. So like why did these people form like this cultic relationship? I guess I don't really get it.
And there were a bunch of them as well, right? Like before QAnon, there was like FBI Anon. There was I forget. There was a bunch of Anons essentially claiming very similar things, that they had information about the deep state and so on. And it was Q that ended up getting pushed by the moderators of the forum and so on, and ended up becoming a lot more famous than the other ones. First post that you're talking about, October 2017, I believe, was literally about how Hillary Clinton was about to be arrested, and
Yeah.
plans have been put in place to stop her from fleeing the country. You know, so
Right.
like clearly that hasn't happened, and yet people still kind of believe it. And I think it's because people kind of believed the broad strokes before anyway.
Hmm.
Um, QAnon, I often refer to QAnon, if I want to be provocative, as like a neo-Nazi death cult,
Yeah.
right? And I do that because the core of QAnon is just the blood libel rehashed for the social media age.
Hmm.
And the blood libel goes right the way back to like, I mean, you could probably say ancient Rome or something, but I think the earliest example I've found of what I would distinctly call blood libel starts in about 1100 AD. So like it's old. It's really, really old.
Right.
And these ideas around like uh an elite cabal of satanic people. Like Alex Jones has been talking about that shit for years before QAnon popped up. David Icke was talking about that shit back in the fucking 70s, you know?
Hmm.
Like none of this is new. I think what QAnon did that a lot of other movements didn't do. I think QAnon is basically just a continuation of flat Earth. You know,
How so?
flat Earth was very, very, very similar. I started, so I hang out in a lot of QAnon groups and stuff just to get like their side of the story,
Hmm.
get recordings of them in their Zoom calls and stuff because it's fascinating and because I want to work out like where they're coming from and stuff. And I did this for a little while with flat Earth as well, because I wanted a break from the neo Nazis that I was studying basically, and I was like, you know, I'll put some of my talents to use, just doing a similar thing, but with flat Earth. It will be a bit of fun, right? It's like kind of light-hearted compared to like Nazi terror orgs, and and it turned out that it wasn't really, you know, it didn't take long to get right down into the blood libel because it's ultimately like, you know, the earth is flat and like therefore there has to be this global conspiracy to keep it quiet that it's, you know, that it's flat
Hmm.
and not round. um and who controls that ultimately is the Jews, right? Like
Right.
it goes straight into triple parenthesis territory very, very quickly.
For those who aren't aware, can you explain what blood libel is?
Oh yeah, sure. So the blood libel is a centuries-old myth that Jewish people are kidnapping. Originally, it was Christian children, but it's kind of, you know, morphed over the centuries, and using them in rituals in order to help prolong their life. And that's sort of the basis of the blood libel, and it's taken on a whole bunch of different forms throughout history. I said one of the earliest examples was like 1100, where they tortured them and cut off their foreskins and used their blood to make unleavened bread for the
Hmm.
was it for like Passover celebrations or something? I might be getting it slightly jumbled up, but yeah, they used their blood to make bread for ritual celebrations, basically. This was the myth that was being perpetrated at the time, and it goes, you know, all the way through to oh geez, what was the example I was just thinking of?
Um.
um well, anyway, it goes all the way through to like QAnon, basically.
Yeah.
And where it's instead of it being like cutting off the foreskin or and using it to make bread, now it is
Which,
kidnapping
by the
children,
way,
torturing
what a
them.
weird fucking thing to just like think people are doing.
It's very, very bizarre. Yeah, it is. It's super, super bizarre. Um, but you know, like it's a centuries old myth. It's been very, very difficult to shake. Oh yeah, the protocols of the learned elders of Zion. That's what I was
Oh
going
yeah,
to
yeah, yeah,
mention.
yeah.
This is why I say that it's like a neo-Nazi death cult, right? Like I don't say anything unless I feel like I can justify it.
Hmm.
So the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion was a piece of anti-Semitic propaganda, which I believe was fashioned originally by the Russians, but ended up being published in Der Stürmer in Nazi Germany. and it basically said a very similar thing, right? Jews are stealing children and using them in blood rituals to help prolong their lives. There's this global conspiracy of Jewish folks who control the world and are responsible for everything fucking bad in it, basically. Yeah, and it's never ending. Centuries old conspiracy theory. I don't think that QAnon is much different. It's just that the methods of communication we have now are different. And QAnon has been particularly successful. This is why I brought flat Earth up, actually.
Okay.
Flat Earth, sorry, flat Earth on its face is a really, really dumb fucking idea, right? Most people are just like, flat Earth, no, fuck that, it's stupid, right? So it's very it's a difficult entryway into that blood libel myth, whereas the idea that elites are involved in some kind of pedophile ring a la Pizzagate isn't as far-fetched as like the Earth is flat.
Right.
And especially with like Jeffrey Epstein being exposed and so on, like it's a lot easier to get people to believe this, that elites sex trafficking children is a genuine, like, really widespread problem that we need to face. I don't even know if that's completely untrue. I imagine there are still quite a lot of people who are connected to Epstein who need to be caught and hunted down,
I mean, that's why he definitely didn't kill himself.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, but I don't even like to say that Epstein didn't kill himself. Because it's another. We don't know what actually happened. It's pretty suspicious, but we have to say that we don't know. If we make the claim that Epstein didn't kill himself, we're playing into that conspiracy theory.
True.
Sorry, I'm not like
okay.
trying to chastise you. I'm just saying I personally don't like to say that. But the circumstances of his death are suspicious. So it's very, very easy to pull somebody in. And I think you repeating that meme kind of like demonstrates it, right? Like it's very easy to pull people into the belief that there is a cabal of powerful people who are covering up child sex trafficking. Because there might be, actually.
I mean,
there probably is.
I mean, I definitely think in the case of Jeffrey Epstein, you have a pretty good case for it. Like,
exactly.
You don't get to build a pedophile island without other people being involved. So like, I mean, like it is one of those things where I'm like, I mean.
And that's one of the very popular kind of entry points into QAnon is save the children, right?
Exactly.
Child sex trafficking is a broad problem in society that people want to try and address, and it targets mums on Facebook, right? Very, very easily kind of sucks them in because they want to protect kids, and there's nothing wrong with that.
No.
We all want to protect kids. Nobody wants kids to be sex trafficked. But it very quickly goes from these sort of real world examples into tying them all into this broad overarching conspiracy theory, which is supposedly centrally orchestrated by shadowy cabal of elites, usually in triple parentheses. And there's a lot of different entryways into QAnon, depending on the kind of things you're already kind of likely to believe. There's the sort of anti-vax entryway into QAnon. There's oh geez, somebody sent me a graph earlier that I can't actually show you because he's using it for something else at the moment and he hasn't made it public yet. But so things like so entryways like the BLM protests, they're actually race riots organized by the deep state. Do you remember after the BLM protests they had the big old banner on the that was not the BLM protests, the Hollywood Save the Children rally. There was a banner on the overpass that said Jews are trying to orchestrate a race war. And then, there's all the conspiracy theories about it that anti-vaxxers have, like people who have legitimate concerns, I guess, especially for those people who lived through thalidomide, about whether or not vaccines are safe. They can be convinced into like, well, Bill Gates is trying to put microchips in everybody and send us all to the FEMA camps, or the vaccines are a way to sort of create population control, and they'll tie it back to like the guide stones. What are they called? I don't know. There's these weird fucking stones in America that have like
Yeah,
all these objectives on them for like world population control. Keep the world population under 200 million or something.
yeah, I'm not entirely sure what it is, but I saw it on an Alex Jones thing. I was
Yeah.
watching Info Wars for the first time the other day, and I was just like, "What is this?"
Yeah, it was like privately commissioned by some weird fucking dude, and it was never finished.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's all these like little real world clues, and then it's like we're gonna tie all of this shit into that broad narrative, right? The globally active deep state cabal of satanic pedophile elites who are responsible for all the evil in the world. And it ties everything up into a neat kind of like black and white narrative. There's a good side and a bad side. There's Q, Trump, the white hats, the digital soldiers and patriots, and then there's the evil cabal who are working behind the scenes to like do all this horrible shit.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And it's very alluring to a lot of like evangelical Christians as well. There's a very, very big sort of evangelical streak, because of course the QAnon prophecy is that Trump and the White Hats will bring about the fall of the cabal, which is actually the name of one of their more popular propaganda movies, Fall of the Cabal.
How do they keep justifying these things when like they don't
happen?
Yeah.
That's the thing, right? Like it keeps going and going and going, and you can see it in a lot of other cults, like that people will predict an end, a time when everything's going to happen. This is what we call millenarianism. I'm not trying to talk down to you, but I know it's a term that's like
totally fine. Talk down to me all you want.
I'm aware there's other people listening as well, and they might not know what millenarianism means. Yeah. But this concept that there's going to be a death of the old world and a birth of the new, and this time of death is probably going to be a time of turmoil, and people are gonna be killed, or there's big changes going to happen. And you see this like in loads of cults, and it comes from the Bible, right? Like Jesus is supposed to come to Earth and usher in 1,000 years of world peace, with his kingdom on Earth, and that's the millennium. That's where we get millenarianism from.
Gotcha.
So it's very, very appealing to like fundamentalist Christians because it plays very neatly into their narrative, right? The storm and the Great Awakening will come, and then Trump will usher in an era of world peace. It's that same kind of narrative.
Yeah, so like, I guess this all ties very neatly with evangelicalism. Is there like, I guess is there a strong correlation between like being an evangelical and being in these cults? Like is it almost like being isolated in the regions where evangelicalism really tends to take off makes you more susceptible to getting indoctrinated into this kind of thing?
It's difficult to say. I would love to see a map of like QAnon believers and like where their populations are most concentrated. All I can say is that from my time spent in QAnon groups, there is a huge fundamentalist Christian portion of QAnon. The vast majority of QAnon people are very, very Christian.
Is it is it like, are there like Muslim QAnoners? Are there like Jewish QAnoners?
I mean, there's got to be, right?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I bumped into a couple of Jewish QAnoners. Because I mean, you know, also Dominionism is very millenarianist as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's quite a few Jewish Dominionists. Um, so yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see a large Jewish contingent, but I haven't personally bumped into them. So again, I can't say for sure,
Gotcha.
unfortunately. And then, of course, you do have the sort of like new agey kind of QAnoners. And in Brazil, actually, have you ever heard of Ashtar Sharan?
No.
So Ashtar Sharan is supposedly an extraterrestrial being who is going to come to Earth at some point and, you know, again, usher in an era of world peace.
Rad.
And there are people who claim that they can communicate with him, kind of like a séance, you know, when a medium channels a dead person.
Mm-hmm.
There are people who claim that they can do this with Ashtar Sharan, so they're like telepathically communicating across space and time
Okay.
with this extraterrestrial, and that's kind of taken off quite a lot in Brazil, actually, in connection with the QAnon stuff as well.
Huh.
So, like I said, there's so many entry points into this. One of my friends I like to call QAnon like I say it's like the Blob, right? Like that old horror movie that just fucking
Yeah.
the big old extraterrestrial blob that just sucks everything around it into it. And my friend calls it a Katamari ball.
Oh, okay.
Cold
Is it just
Katamari ball
is
that
it
just
just like
hoovers
that?
everything up.
Is it just like that adaptable? Like it can basically merge with anything?
I mean, it seems to be so far, yeah. I mean, that's probably why it's been so successful, is that it's managed to appeal to all these sort of different groups, like the health and wellness type people, the new agey type people, the fundamentalist Christians. Obviously, there's sort of the militias, like 3%er type folks who believe in the Democrats being part of a shadowy cabal. It You know, the old Illuminati conspiracy theorists and some of these extraterrestrial cult type people. It really has managed to just go, yeah, well, you believe those things, we can tell you how that's linked to our stuff, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you might think Bill Gates is evil and trying to inject you with a vaccine to like reduce the world population, but why is he doing that? Well,
Right.
he's doing it because he's a servant of the cabal, right? Like, it's yeah.
Okay.
And essentially, it all comes back to shadowy group of usually triple parenthesis elites that are responsible for all the evil in the world. That's the you know, you can, and yeah, and it has been my experience that you can usually tie any kind of highly conspiratorial movement back to that basic concept.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So QAnon's just been really great at marketing. that's
Yeah.
that's
So,
basically what it is.
and
Yeah.
like uh, that's another thing that I've been really curious about. Like how has this group managed to gain so much power so quickly? Like within
Mm,
the span of like a very short amount of time, we now have like elected representatives who are QAnon people.
yeah.
And how do they keep like justifying that like is this I guess there's no line they can like really cross. Like they can always just say there's more shadowy deep state figures to slay. You know,
I mean, I guess. Sorry, I'm not sure what your question is there.
like we're now electing representatives to our government who are
Mm,
QAnon, like just come from the QAnon background, come from these communities,
mhm,
and they are under the impression that they are going into the government to save the children, you know, uh, combat the deep state, all that stuff, right?
mhm, yeah.
And
I think
I'm
there's 6 or 7 in local state legislatures, and then there's 2 in Congress: Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert.
and I'm guessing there's not like a clear win condition for them. Like there's not a
The
point
one
at which
condition is when the storm comes. You see
right.
a lot of well, you know, ultimately what's supposed to happen is the storm is supposed to come. Everybody's supposed to be woken up to the evils of the world, and this is supposed to happen through the exposing of a huge group of well, the exposing of the cabal, basically, right? And then everybody who's been involved with the cabal is going to be like tried for treason or war crimes or whatever, and sent to Gitmo or executed and hung from lampposts and shit.
As you do.
Yeah, right. Well, because they're satanic pedophilic traitors that have destroyed the world for centuries. So
Exactly. Yeah.
the most horrible tortures imaginable are waiting for them. Yeah. And that's the death cult part of my neo-Nazi death cult, by the way.
Right.
People get very confused when they start saying death cult about like the GOP. It kind of frustrates me because what they mean is that, you know, people are part of people are very very fanatically devoted to a political party that causes a lot of misery and suffering and indeed death. But when we say death cult, we're pretty much referring, like in terms of conversations about cults, we're talking about millenarianism, and we're talking about that sort of death of the old world and usually death of a large group of people that they're fascinated with. Yeah. Sorry, I went on a tangent there, but I just thought it ties in nicely. It justifies me calling it a neo-Nazi death cult at the beginning.
Yeah.
I've now fully justified that statement. But yeah, your question was about the QAnoners going into government and like how.
Yeah.
So yeah, sorry.
Like I guess I'm not sure what their objectives are. Like if they're true believers, right? Like I'm not entirely sure what their objectives are when like a lot of their objectives that they need to achieve are largely like fabricated.
Yeah, it's really hard to say, right? And it's difficult to say whether the people who are getting into government whilst talking about this QAnon stuff, like how many of them definitely believe what they're saying and how many of them are just sort of playing into the narratives of the day to get themselves elected. There are some that definitely kind of believe what they say there, for sure. I've got some really creepy videos of like state legislature candidates who are absolutely off their fucking rockers, and I have no doubt in my mind that they honestly believe what they're talking about.
Yeah.
But then there's some like Lauren Boebert, for example, who you could say might believe in some sort of QAnon adjacent stuff and kind of played to that crowd a lot. And now that she's been elected, she's tried to distance herself, so she's clearly not as fervently she's not a true believer, you know.
Gotcha.
It's hard to say that she's a true believer. So who knows what their actual objectives are other than just getting themselves into government. But inevitably they all have some pretty extreme beliefs, usually some pretty extreme fundamentalist Christian beliefs, which we should all be kind of worried about, especially as like LGBT folks. Like, we're I mean, like we get freaked out about Dominionists as well. Like, I don't see a huge difference. I think it would take a lot more people to get into government to make any kind of like legislation or start any like full-on pogroms or anything like that. Which, I mean, is ultimately where this shit goes, right? Because it's like, who's the cabal? Well, you know, the satanic globalist elites. George Soros, Hollywood, the Democrats, BLM, Antifa, anybody who voted Democrat. Like, we need to get rid of them. They're satanic, they're evil, they're traitors to our democracy. But I think it would take a lot more than just a few QAnon Congress members to be able to sort of push anything like that into being.
Yeah. I guess, how do we, like, what's a good way of us to maybe not necessarily reach these people, because they might, like, I'm fully willing to accept they might be too far gone, but like how do we properly combat these ideas, right? Like, how do we prevent them from taking hold?
I think awareness is good. We talked a lot about entry points into QAnon, right? and you can try and combat misinformation around those entry points. Like the vaccine stuff and everything.
Yeah.
Definitely kind of just deplatform, get rid of that shit. Stop people being convinced into it. But ultimately, I think it has to come, like we always fucking say, from changing people's material conditions. I don't
Right.
think that people get involved in these things, or at least they don't get obsessive to the point of like losing family members and stuff
Hmm.
without something else being not quite right in their lives.
Right.
Like often. Although QAnon's kind of swollen to the point where I suppose it could be just getting perfectly healthy and normal people with like no problems in their life whatsoever involved. But yeah, I mean, it they definitely prey on people who are isolated, who are already fearful, who already have some kind of conspiratorial beliefs,
Hmm.
and so I think those are the kind of angles we have to fight it at. But I can't see a solid way to fight it within our current system other than just consistently trying to deplatform them as much as possible. And it's
Yeah.
so huge now; it's really, really difficult.
It is
Yeah.
difficult. Like, I guess at least part of my analysis has been that the attraction to groups like incels and like
Mm,
uh, QAnon is somewhat similar in that it preys on these isolated, atomized groups.
yeah.
I kind of view it as like a symptom of late stage capitalism, in that sense.
Especially people who have a lot of time to sort of spend doom scrolling through Twitter or whatever internet forums they can find, right? So
Yeah.
people who are disenfranchised, unemployed, perhaps they're elderly and retired, in the case of a lot of QAnon people.
Where do
So
you where do you see a lot of like the radicalization happening? Is it on Facebook or is it on 4chan? Is it elsewhere?
I think the vast majority of people who get involved with QAnon like have no idea what 8can is actually where Q posts now. They wouldn't be able to navigate it. I mean, it's fucking uh, uh, it's impenetrable. Like even for me going on at 8can, I'm like, oh my god, this is just so poorly set up. Like trying to navigate this website's horrible. And if they knew what it was as well, I mean, 8can was like, I mean, it originally just it was pretty much anything goes, right? They got shut down for child porn initially.
Right.
They were distributing child porn on that website. So, which a lot of QAnoners would probably be pretty dead set against, given that they're so worried about saving the children from sex trafficking.
Yeah, yeah.
So I don't think that the majority of people like even know about 8can except like adjacently. Usually these posts are sort of distributed. So like Q will make a post, and then it'll be picked up by the people in the 8can who call themselves like bakers, right? And their job is to take the crumbs, the little pieces of information that Q puts out, and bake them into bread,
That's
which
not
they
how
then
baking
distribute.
works.
Yeah, well, it's,
They can't
nothing
get
is how
anything
everything
right.
works in Q, okay? But yeah, they take the crumbs, they bake them into bread, which is then distributed to the general populace, and the bread is sort of like these large uh, explanatory posts and the research posts and stuff like that. Um, and then, of course, you have websites like QAGG and QApp and a couple of others that just sort of upload the Q drops so that, dedicated digital soldiers can just get updates on the regular whenever Q posts something. It will just be posted everywhere for them. They don't have to go to the source because most of them would be fucking horrified at the kind of stuff that they would find at the source if they could even navigate this sort of uh, MC Escher-esque construction
Right.
that the forums are in.
So like yeah, I guess
I mean, it's Facebook. It's Facebook. I've said it before. It's Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Really, these are the front-facing platforms, right?
Mm-hmm.
These are the entry points in terms of platform where most people end up discovering this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and then they'll get funneled into more and more extreme sort of places. You know, you go from like Facebook to like, you'll go from like YouTube to like DLive to like BitChute, you know.
Yeah.
But I think we really need to focus because it's very difficult to get those people who are on like BitChute. You're not going to convince them to stop hosting this shit, right?
Yeah.
Whereas like YouTube, I think you genuinely could with enough social pressure, right?
And for those who don't know, BitChute is basically like the Nazi YouTube.
I mean, kind of. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
includes like it's not just Nazi YouTube. It's like fucking everything YouTube. I mean, you can get like you can find. I was doing jihadism for a little while, and I found I wasn't doing jihadism. I was looking at jihadism for a while, and
you were
find,
waging
like,
jihad. Interesting. Tell us more.
Yeah, well, you know, fuck the kafir, you know. No, what was I saying? Yeah, you can find basically anything on there, pretty much on BitChute. Yeah, so it's not just like Nazi shit, but obviously Nazi shit is included in basically anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess.
But
like,
yeah,
how,
so we have to place pressure on specifically. I would say those three platforms: Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, to try and get them to take these things down. And every once in a while, they do acquiesce. Right, just prior to the election, there was this massive purge of QAnon accounts from Facebook, from Facebook and YouTube, and then from Twitter. And then Discord as well. Discord is another important platform for radicalization. But I would say it's more important for like white supremacist radicalization.
Yeah.
Although it can definitely be a place for QAnon as well. So Discord removed like the Patriot Soapbox Discord and stuff like that. It was a big old purge, right?
Yeah.
But the problem with this is that if you don't have constant monitoring, they just make new accounts. Right? They're just going to make new accounts. They'll spread it around between their buddies, and get all their followers back. And in a couple of months, it's like they never left. You know, especially on Facebook and Twitter. It's a little harder for them on YouTube, but then they just go to like, you know, they'll fuck off to like DLive or something, or Twitch. I thought we'd got Patriot Soapbox removed from Twitch. We managed to get them suspended apparently, and now they're back. No idea why. But you have like, yeah, so all the people that were on YouTube, quite a lot of them have moved to Twitch. Red Pill 78 actually had an interview with Jordan Sather, and these are both people that have been removed from YouTube. The Patriot Soapbox thing I talked about as well. So yeah, they do find new platforms, but definitely like Twitch. I think is harder for your grandma to find, right? Like it's getting a little bit more popular, but your grand's probably going to be on Facebook or YouTube, right? Or maybe Twitter.
Yeah.
And I think focusing on those entry points, I think, is a really good way to reduce the amount of people who just come into contact with it at all.
Mm-hmm. I was going to ask, like, how do these people just take Q posts at face value now? Like, how do you get to that when like you don't even know where the posts are coming from anymore? Or was it always kind of like that? Like, were they unaware of like 4chan?
Like I say, it's a spectrum, but I think the vast majority of people just assume that the posts that are being put up on these sort of apps like QAGG are Q posts, no matter what. And they probably are, right? Because Q posts are identified by a unique trip code. The problem with that is that you have like it's possible to crack that trip code and for other people to post them. It's happened before. depending on who owns the website at the time, like it can be passed between them. At the moment, like Jim Watkins kind of owns Aitken, and he could feasibly post as Q at any time, right? He could feasibly like take that trip code away from the person who is posting now and just post as Q himself. So it's difficult to say if it's always been the same person posting. It seems like it has actually changed hands, and there's a bunch of different reasons for coming to that conclusion that I won't get into now because it's long and boring and I don't fully understand it because I'm not a computer whiz. But yeah, I'm reliably informed from other experts on the subject that there's good reason to believe that the QAnon the Q trip code has changed hands. And our best sort of current guess is that either Jim Watkins or somebody who works with him is posting as Q. So,
oh man,
yeah,
this
and
goes
Jim
so
Watkins has
deep.
child porn convictions as well. By the way,
Yeah.
it's interesting to note.
How does that information not make it into like the Q bubble, right?
Well, you know, if it does, it's because people are trying to smear him, right? It's the same as like Trump, right? Like everybody
Okay.
fucking knows Trump was accused of raping a 13-year-old girl on Jeffrey Epstein's island, but like that's obviously just a smear campaign by the deep state. Like,
Right.
yeah, and it would be even if they could prove it and convicted him. It would just be another smear campaign because, like I said earlier, it's not necessarily about the facts of the eventual beliefs of the sort of fringe beliefs. It's that these, you know, Trump can't possibly be a child molester because he's the one who's going to bring about the millennium.
Right.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
it ultimately wouldn't matter what kind of proof you showed them, and the same can be said for Jim Watkins. You know, if they're even aware of who Jim Watkins is, I would say the vast majority of like Q adjacent people have no idea who he is.
Yeah, it seems as if like a lot. I was reading up on carnivorous plants earlier, and there's a type of carnivorous plant trap where the deeper you go into it, you know, you can't get out. It's like it's a pretty decent trap. Like it's easy to go in, but then like the way the plant is structured, you can't get out. It seems like with a lot of these people, this is kind of how it goes, right? Like first couple steps, not you know, yeah, Jeffrey Epstein was a pedophile, so clearly like there's something out there, and there's something to this. And the next step, okay, that's kind of reasonable from where I was, but then like eventually you hit a point of absolutely no return, right?
Yeah, what was it? There was that girl who put up that like pyramid a little while ago. I don't completely agree with it, but she called it like the anti-Semitic point of no return, right? She was like, once you get into believing that the the Jews are controlling the world and
Right.
kidnapping children to use in life prolonging rituals, you're probably not coming back from that anytime soon.
Yeah.
and that's probably true. But I think it's interesting that you noticed that, right? Because with all the failed prophecies of Q, you would think, and with Trump losing the election and so on, you would think that a lot of people would just go, well, shit, this is obviously bullshit. I've been conned. I'm gonna go and join a yoga class or something. Actually, that's a whole other entryway into cultism that I don't need to talk about right now. But whatever, right?
We
I'll
can
go
come back
join
around to
another
it.
cult. I'll go join another cult. And I think for some people that does happen. I think there's all these moments, right, which are like moments that are tests of faith, if you like. And some people fail the test of faith and drift away from the movement, and some people dig themselves further in. And the more of these moments that you have where you like rationalize away the obvious debunking of what you believe, the harder it is for you to get out, for sure. Because
So,
the more detached from reality you become, you're solidifying and constructing this alternate reality in which you live,
mhm.
the more you ignore the actual facts of what's going on, the more solid your new reality becomes, and the more ephemeral the reality the rest of us live in becomes.
How does this get wrapped up in kind of like, because a lot of the cults that I've been encountering lately, like with QAnon and like other conservative movements, it seems like a lot of
Um,
them have this underlying undercurrent of anti-Semitism or Nazism,
yeah,
fascism. Like, where
mhm.
how does this all keep coming back to that point?
It's weird, right? I mean, we spoke about this right at the
Mm-hmm.
start of the conversation, like how the blood libel is just this fucking centuries old thing that's been rehashed a million times and is now kind of showing itself in QAnon and in quite a few other cults, I have to say. Um, but yeah, I don't know. It just seems to be a thing that we do as human beings. We're like, yeah, fuck the Jews. Like, I don't fully understand it myself either. It's like it really, really sucks. Like,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you're Jewish. Like, it's
Yeah.
just like, what did they do? What did they do? They didn't do anything. Leave them alone. Yeah. Every single time I look into a new kind of cultic movement, I am always, I don't know, about 5, 6 years ago, I was kind of naive to this concept.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I would be surprised when it finally ended up in anti-Semitism. But once it's happened like 20 times, you just like, you go into a new one and you're like I said about Flat Earth, right? You go into Flat Earth, this will be fun. Oh, wait.
uh,
Triple parentheses everywhere.
for
Like,
chat, I'm talking with Vivian Wulf. Um, I,
yeah.
and yeah, they're an expert on cults and fringe movements, and we're having a great time just talking about this weird stuff. Also, bum.
Expert might be a stretch.
Uh,
Amateur researcher with who is lucky enough to be able to speak to a lot of people who are much more knowledgeable than me.
and Brumpo Tungus, thank you very much for the follow. I appreciate it. Um, sorry, just somebody wanted to know who you were, so I wanted to make sure
That's totally
credit where
fine.
credit's due.
I can type in chat. I can go, hi, chat. There you go.
There you go.
That's me. That's me. Um, yeah, fuck, what were we even saying? I don't know. Oh, you were like, why does it always come back to
Yeah.
anti-Semitism? And I was like, I wish I had a fucking answer for that. It seems to be something that we really kind of like want to believe that there's a kind of enemy within.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it always seems to get tied into anti-Semitism somehow. But then you do, especially in Christian kind of places,
Mm-hmm.
anything attached to Christianity, because Christianity is the beginning of like real hardcore anti-Semitism, right? Like the Jews killed Jesus,
Right.
um, and so it even rears its head when we're talking about things like witchcraft in early America and the Salem witch trials and so on, and of course the Satanic Panic in the sort of 60s, 70s, 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it just seems to be this weird recurring theme. Like we always need a secret cabal of evildoers who are responsible for all the bad shit. Um, and the Jews are just a really good target for that because there's all these stories that have been told for generations about the Jews,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yeah.
So I think that myth never goes away because it's always being tied. Other things are always being tied back into it. Like if I had to make any kind of analogy, I mean, ultimately, I don't know why we keep talking about the Jews, but
Yeah.
but it seems to me that like, yeah, we have to have the secret cabal. We have to have the evil within that we're constantly trying to fight against and purge.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of our kind of like cultural makeup for some reason. Um, and because there's not really a huge gap between each of these panics,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like if we just talk about the 20th century, you're talking about the conspiracy theories around like Bolshevism, cultural Marxism, you know the drill, and all that shit with the fucking Nazis. Everybody was very, very anti-Semitic at the time, and everybody really loves Churchill, but he was a horrible fucking racist anti-Semite and he committed genocides of his own. So so you go from like Nazis to like the Red Scare, which was again very much tied in with like Judaism, with the cultural Bolshevism narrative, the cultural Marxism narrative, to the Satanic Panic, which once again gets tied back to the Jews, to sort of the Illuminati shit, and then modern day QAnon. So there's never not a time where there isn't somebody talking about the secret cabal and it being tied back to the Jews.
Right.
I think it's like a continuous narrative that we've never defeated.
That's super interesting. In a awful way, right?
Yeah.
So, and this even rears its head in like flat Earth, because like the Jews are like the part of the shady organization that wants to prevent you from knowing about how the Earth is flat.
Sorry, could you say that again? Somebody sent me a message and distracted me.
Oh, I was just asking if this is also like even when it comes to something like flat Earth, which a lot of people might initially assume is like completely unrelated.
Well, flat Earth requires a global conspiracy.
Right. Yeah.
Which requires some kind of central force. It requires some kind of shadowy cabal. And so flat Earth was always going to get tied back into anti-Semitism because we hadn't got over the anti-Semitism of the Satanic Panic. And not only that, but flat Earth ultimately is kind of a cover anyway. Flat Earth is the front-facing conspiracy theory that's meant to sort of like draw people in, and it's the thing that they say that they ostensibly believe, but it's more a case of the Earth has to be flat because everybody is trying to deceive us, and everybody is trying to deceive us because there's this secret conspiracy, right?
Right.
So yeah, it's that same shit that I talked about earlier with like the peripheral beliefs that appear to be the front-facing beliefs, that appear to be the core beliefs, that are in fact just sort of they're I don't know if I'd say logical, but they're conclusions that follow from the real core beliefs, and the real core beliefs are sort of more intuitive, I suppose. They're not necessarily spoken out loud all of the time, but it's just a thing that is culturally understood by a lot of people, that there are elites working behind the scenes to make the world a horrible place.
So does this then become like recruiting grounds for like Nazis?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, like I mean,
the amount of fucking skull mask fuckery that I saw in I saw even in flat Earth servers, it would pop up all of the time, and I see it all of the time in QAnon spaces as well, especially in conversations surrounding things like the BLM protests recently and so on, right? Like there's QAnon fucking loves their Pepe memes as well, which just means that that's like prime Nazi fodder, basically. They can just go in there and post whatever the fuck they want, and by and large, it won't be nobody in that group, or okay, the people that aren't in the know won't know that it's Nazi propaganda that's being posted. You know?
Oh, okay.
Because it's so close to the stuff that they post already anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is partly what worries me. Like it seems like there's been kind of a growth in these movements. Is that largely because it's had kind of this figurehead of the president of the United States, or is there something else going
on? Well, what we know is that under democratic presidencies, the membership of extremist groups tends to spike.
Really? Okay.
Because it's spooky, right? The guys who want to take away your guns are in control. and so the protest movement rises, kind of like BLM and so on, like spiked under Trump. Trump has bucked the trend somewhat because he has offered hospitality, offered solace and validation to these extremist movements and encouraged them himself. And he's had members of his administration and his campaign team doing the same. You know, Stephen Miller, Bannon, whoever the fuck in his campaign team thought it was a really great idea to put out 88 adverts that, with the first sentence being 14 words long, and a red triangle on it. You know, so I mean, there's obviously people within the administration who have been like cultivating and encouraging this shit. But even with all that going on, they didn't spike as much as they did under Obama or under Clinton, in terms of like membership. Yeah. So membership was already pretty fucking high under Obama already. But we have had some things happen that are pretty fucking big, right? Like we've had the pandemic, we've had the BLM protests. Both of those are really, really great kind of recruiting tools in terms of like political narratives. And both of those have resulted in people having a lot more time and inclination to spend time on social media, Facebook and Twitter and whatnot. And so I think that's mostly why we're seeing a huge spike. I would say is because of like COVID and the BLM protests, and just the incredibly contentious political climate. You know, I think this year, 2019 and 2020, we've had this sort of perfect storm of like conditions for radicalization. I don't think you can get much better conditions for radicalization than like global pandemic, political unrest, whatever you want to call Trump, hyper-nationalist, American neo-fascist, whatever, president in control, like, and capitalism basically shitting its pants and everybody having no fucking money. So that's the answer, I guess. Yeah. the conditions are really, really good for radicalization right now.
So I guess like I keep kind of tossing this around in my head, but like, have you found so two questions. What have you found makes people de-radicalize, even if there's not like a consistency to these things, I guess? And how many of these people are like true believers versus like they're just using it for their own advantage?
So there's definitely the grift sphere, right? Like the QAnon grift sphere,
right?
Of people who are making money off of this stuff by making content, selling T-shirts and hats, whatever. And I would say, some of those people are definitely are just grifting. But you can never really know what's like in somebody's head, so it's difficult to judge. Like how many are like full-on grifters and how many sort of kind of believe some of it. And I also think people have a propensity for like tricking themselves into believing the things that they need to believe sometimes, Like if it's making you a lot of money, you might just it's against your interests to sort of pay too much attention to things that might dissuade you from believing. But having said that, like there's people who are making healthy livings off of it, but there's nobody who's getting like batshit crazy rich off of it. Right. Like not really that I can see anyway. It seems to be just like it's sort of more an industry, right, rather than like a few individuals making a shitload of money. But yeah, so that's how many people are how many people actually believe it. I couldn't tell you. Yeah, as much as like right wing punditry or or televangelists or whatever, right? It's really really difficult to tell who is really invested in the smell of their own farts and
Right.
who knows they stink but holds their nose for the payday anyway. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, Shit. What was the other question? Oh, why do people de-radicalize?
Yeah.
In terms of QAnon, it's difficult to say because the broad membership, like the massive spike in membership that we've seen, is relatively recent. And there's a few people with stories of how they've left the movement individually, but I gotta be honest and say I can't remember the details of any of them off the top of my head.
Yeah.
I know there's been a couple, and I have read a couple, but like they're pretty rare at the moment. So even if I could recount the story of like one or two people, that may or may not represent the bulk of people who leave QAnon. I think people are likely to leave as they notice hypocrisies within the movement and so on. But like we said earlier, it's sort of like how solid is the new reality that you've constructed for yourself, right?
Right.
Like how much of a hypocrisy, how much of a shock is it going to take for you to leave? In terms of like neo-Nazi and white supremacist movements in general, it's often that people do notice some kind of hypocrisy within their movement, or they have some kind of big life change, right?
Okay.
There's a short film featuring a buddy of mine, Daryl Lamont Jenkins. He's like an anti-fascist researcher, and he helped this chap get out because that's one of the things that his organization, One People's Project, do. So he helped him get out of white power, helped him get some of his tattoos removed, hence why the short film's called Skin.
Okay.
And it describes how this chap ended up leaving because he noticed, I think it was that he noticed that like a bunch of the higher ups in the white power group that he was a part of were doing drugs, right? Which was like a big no-no, degeneracy, crime, all that sort of stuff within the sphere that he was in. And that caused him to be like, shit, I'm like living up to the ideals that these sort of fascist ideals of the ideal man, and nobody around me in this organization is doing that. And that was like a big shock to him. Whereas some other people might leave because they have some big life change, like having children is a good one. Especially for people in white power, right? Because they exist in a very, very violent sphere, especially if you're in one of the more violent gangs like the Vinlanders or the Hammerskins or the Aryan Brotherhood or something like that. This is an incredibly violent sphere that you don't want your kids growing up in, basically. And so that can be like an impetus for change as well. Ultimately, I think the impetus, the motivation for change and for getting out, like, has to come from that person. But like I alluded to earlier, I think that the improving of like material conditions for people in general can help less people get radicalized and inspire more people to leave. Because if you're no longer isolated and feeling like shit, and you can make connections in your local community, these can all be sort of like I said, impetuses for change, right?
Right.
But unfortunately, we have to fight against that sometimes because isolating people, quarantining them from the local community, is one of the ways in which we fight recruitment and radicalization, right?
Yeah.
One of the ways in which we stop people from being able to do harm to others while they're in these movements. And so that's why I think it's important that there is like this diversity of tactics, I suppose, in which there are organizations that are like, yeah, we will fight you, but if you want to leave at any point, like, we've got your back. We can hook you up with therapists, we can hook you up with talk groups, we can help you get your fucking white power tattoos removed, whatever.
Get your life back together.
Yeah, exactly. And so on an individual level, I mean, nobody is obligated to do this. Having a family member who falls into a cult is an extraordinarily fucking stressful thing to deal with. But if you can, if you can, just try and keep that window open for grandma or granddad or whatever, right? Like, just say, hey, you know, if you want to come around and have beers at any point, that's fine. I don't want to talk to you about any of this QAnon shit, but if you want to just have a couple of beers and watch the sports ball, like, I'm down for that. We should do that sometime, you know. If it's like your mother or somebody you live with, there's this subreddit called I think it's QAnon Casualties. Casualties of QAnon Casualties, I think it is.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good community to go to. You can find other people who are having similar problems with like close family members being in QAnon and losing their shit. Also, r/cults is a good resource for just general cultic fuckery.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're in some kind of weird evangelical sect or what have you, same kind of thing. Good resource to go to. For the QAnon specific stuff, though, if it's like your mum, your dad, whatever, it becomes an obsession. It becomes their whole world, their whole reality. You know.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to, I at least think, in order for them to see a way out, there has to be another thing that they're doing, that they're, you know, another part of their reality that they find important.
Right.
So you can do stuff like, say, you know, I know you want to talk about the QAnon stuff all the time, but I really liked when we did get a beer and watch the sports ball, right? So like maybe every week we get a beer and watch the sports ball, and we don't talk about QAnon at all, right? Because no matter how important QAnon is, like, I'm sure we can leave it for a couple of hours on a Sunday, you know?
Right.
And you can get together and do that, and that can provide some kind of basis for like an outlet for some kind of social interaction that doesn't have to do with the cult, you know?
Yeah.
Because otherwise they're spending all their time doom scrolling through Twitter and talking with each other on these forums and in Discord and what have you, and they're just constantly having their beliefs reinforced, constantly having this reality that they live in solidified. And I think you have to present them with the alternate reality and just keep them aware that that alternate reality exists. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It almost seems like definitely the solution is not depriving them of this supportive external community, right? Like they need that in order to get better, because otherwise, like, what they're stuck in the middle of this. They realize, hey, maybe I was wrong, and then, oh fuck, that's your entire life, right?
I can't possibly be wrong, right? Like,
yeah.
there is no reality outside of the one I now exist in.
Yeah.
So I'll cling to that with everything I'm worth, and you get that kind of cognitive dissonance that kind of keeps them there because they just don't see anything else.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. So, I mean, that is the best advice that I can give. I know there are other people that have spoken on this as well, and I'm basically repeating the things that they say to you. But yeah, definitely, if you're somebody with a family member or whatever, try and find some kind of support group, some kind of group of people that that also get involved in these things. There's also the what's it called? The Something of Cultic Studies. I get their newsletter, so I should remember. But my brain is
it's all good.
It's like a leaky sieve. Like, it's a leaky sieve full of mashed potato, right? And mashed potato is all the information that I've got in this enormous fucking brain.
Well, you've been doing pretty good with the mashed potatoes.
I'm just shoving more and more in every day, and it just kind of squeezes out the holes.
This is a bit disturbing because I ate mashed potatoes last night.
I love mashed potatoes.
They're so good.
Yeah, sorry, the International Cultic Studies Association. If you want to get involved with that in a slightly, if you want to find professionals, they hold seminars and webinars and stuff like that, and you'll also be able to find links on their website to like put you in contact with other people if you want help that is professional. But if you want just sort of social support and the understanding of people who've been through similar positions, I can't like those subreddits, QAnon casualties and r/cults. They're both very good starting points. They're pretty healthy communities.
Interesting. So I guess what's I had one more question.
Mhm.
What was it? I lost it. I got distracted by mashed potatoes.
They're really good. I
They are
love
really
mashed
good.
potatoes.
They're really good.
Right, one of my biggest weaknesses.
um, but like, I've also we also have kind of noted that like this QAnon thing doesn't seem to be just uniquely American. It seems to be kind of gaining ground in other countries as well. Is that because
Thanks
of
for that.
is that because of like the way like we kind of talked about it earlier, how adaptable it is? That
Mm,
because I initially assumed when I started hearing about QAnon that it was just going to be a uniquely American thing because like
yeah.
rah patriotism, USA, exceptionalism, blah blah blah. And it doesn't
Exceptional in the amount of bullshit you guys can pump out.
exactly. It doesn't seem to have been that though, and that's been consistently very surprising to me.
I think initially it was.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, its ability to sort of adapt to and absorb so many other conspiracy theories has served it well on the world stage. And definitely with coronavirus and a lot of countries having these very strict sort of lockdowns, again, the more time people have to doom scroll through Twitter,
Mm-hmm.
you know, uh, or Facebook or whatever, the more likely they are to fall into these things if they're like inclined towards it already anyway. Um, yeah, so those perfect conditions for radicalization that I talked about, they're global at the moment, right? Like this
Right.
is a global pandemic, and a lot of people are suffering, both economically and in terms of just being isolated. Um, so I think that's really really helped it along, in combination with the fact that QAnon is so mercurial in its entry points.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. They'll just accept anybody, basically. It's like, you have a conspiracy theory? Hey, that's probably because of the cabal, you know? Like,
Yeah, it seems like you have some good points about that there cabal.
yeah, exactly. They covered up the UFO landings. Yeah, of course they did. You think the cabal would want you to know about UFOs? Who's the cabal? Oh, well, let me tell you. Yeah, it's yeah, I think that's ultimately, I think that's the only explanation I've really got for it is yeah, people spending way more time on social media. I mean, look how much Facebook and Twitter have seen their profits go up by
True.
during these during the pandemic.
It's been
That's
a
all you
lot.
really need to know about the situation. Like how much more time people are spending on these apps, and ultimately where I think we need to be attacking it the hardest, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I said earlier, we need to hold these companies to account. We need to say, hey, you can't be hosting this kind of disinfo on your platform, you know,
Yeah,
because it's tearing families apart. In some cases, it's inspiring people to commit criminal acts like trying to kidnap children or fucking block the Hoover Dam with an armored truck or try and assassinate Justin Trudeau or going after Joe Biden with a fucking car full of knives. Like, I
yeah,
mean, some pretty bizarre fucking assassination plots, but you know, it only takes one to get through. So,
exactly. Ah, gosh, everything, everything seems to be getting progressively stupider, and I'm not sure if that's just me or if like every like I don't know. I feel like our cults used to be at least a little bit more sophisticated. I'm not sure what happened. You know.
I mean, I'm not sure they were really. I mean, if you look at like Jonestown or Heaven's Gate or Um, yeah, like, were they really much smarter? Like, I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
Maybe a little
at least the
smarter.
people at Jonestown had to drink Kool-Aid, you know? Like, like they at
Well,
least had to
I
do
mean,
something.
a lot of them had to do it at gunpoint, but
True.
yeah, they had to. I think more importantly, they had to move to Jonestown, right?
Yeah, right.
Which was like, uh, shit. My brain's just completely gone splat. Where was Jonestown? It was in like Guyana or somewhere.
Yeah, it's like totally different country. Like, I don't know. Like that's at least like a barrier to entry. Whereas QAnon
Yeah, well,
people are just like sitting in their homes, just like
well,
yeah,
that's the thing, isn't it? It makes it very, very easy to recruit just having this sort of broad web of information. You don't even have to go to church. Like, you
right,
don't have to go watch Jim Jones speak at church. You can just fucking find this shit on the internet. You can watch a million videos of different people espousing these beliefs and ideals to you. And you can just like lounge in front of your sofa all day soaking that shit up. Yeah. And it's yeah, we have a really, really dangerous kind of information ecosystem. Which is part of a much, much broader conversation around sort of misinformation in general, right?
mm-hmm.
Like how many people you can get to believe all kinds of fucking crazy shit. And then election manipulation and yada yada yada. It's not something that I think we're ready for, like as a society. Like
Right.
how much information you can just like splurge out onto the internet and yeah.
What? So like you're an anarchist. So like, what is your like? How do we get ready for this? Right? Like, what do we do for this? You know, like what's because like I feel like you would be against like
What, social
restrict
media companies censoring people?
not necessarily social media companies censoring people, but like we've already found that we have like these pipelines, right? Like
Yeah.
I feel like these people at this point, you know, with I mean maybe with existing cults it's a different question, right? But like
Mhm.
um I'm just curious what your take is here.
I mean, like I said, social pressure on these social media companies to like curate the information that they allow on their platform, to take some fucking responsibility, essentially, for people using their platform to radicalize and recruit for everything from like far right extremist terror orgs to cults like QAnon.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's a real and genuine problem, from Facebook to Twitter to YouTube to fucking D Live to Discord.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, it's that's the only thing that we can do. And yeah, I am an anarchist, and the idea of like some unelected official deciding what information can and cannot be displayed to other people is kind of spooky to me. I have to recognize like the reality that we exist in and
Mm-hmm.
the structures that are currently in place. There's no point in sitting there and saying, oh, well, if it's not an anarchist utopia, I'm not going to engage with it.
Right.
Ultimately, we live in this system and we have to try and influence those people who have power to use the power in ways that we would prefer, right?
Right.
Like, you have to accept the reality you live in, whilst also fighting to change it, you know?
Right.
I'm not I've said it before. I'm not one of those anarchists who sits around all day just fucking jacking off over what the eventual anarcho-communist society is going to look like.
Right.
Um, my anarchism is about getting people to recognize that they have power and that they deserve a say in how they are ruled. And one of the ways in they deserve a say in how they are ruled, how resources are spent, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And there is nothing more anarchistic, I would say, than bringing an element of democracy to these companies that heretofore have pretty much, carte blanche to do whatever the fuck they want,
Yeah.
right? This is it is a democratic thing to do, to have people lobby and try and persuade companies to act in their best interests,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, yeah, at least the people are getting a say in what the companies are doing.
Yeah.
So yeah, we should yeah, place pressure on them to do that.
Okay.
Sorry, people have a lot of skewed kind of perceptions of anarchists, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Probably because there's a lot of people who identify as anarchists who are just like, I don't know, either Chomskyite college kids or like Anna kiddies who just don't want to engage with the system at all. And I reject kind of both of them, honestly.
Yeah.
Because activism is about, or at least, yeah, like if you want to make the world a better place, then you have to engage with the world, not with theories of utopias.
Mm-hmm.
You have to work out what you can do to make the world a better place here and now.
Yeah.
And I perhaps flatter myself in thinking that I like to propose pragmatic solutions from an anarchist perspective.
Yeah. You want to take tangible steps to achieve your goals, and I get that. You know.
Yeah.
I'm actually the same way. You know, I'm not. I use my platform specifically to advocate for like market socialism because I think it's a good step towards achieving an anarchist revolution in a long-term sense. But yeah, that might
That's
be.
what I mean. Like revolution, any kind of like violent uprising or armed revolution, like, it's just really, it's ridiculous to think about right now.
Right.
Absolutely ridiculous. Never mind the arguments about how the state has, you know, all the guns and stuff and they're gonna just put you down. You don't have the philosophical or ideological grounding within society to produce a sustainable socialist, anarchist, or even communist state after the revolution. All those think of all those revolutions and the kind of fascist co-option that they had to deal with. You know, the White Army with the Bolsheviks, and like one of the ones that I like to bring up a lot is the Iranian Revolution, which started with, you know, some relatively, I'm not saying completely, but some relatively left-wing kind of labor-focused ideals and so on. Get rid of the Shah, and ended up being co-opted and replaced by a theocratic, like Islamo-fascist dictatorship. You know, but halfway through the revolution, you got socialists swinging from fucking lampposts. You got people being like gay people being executed in the streets. We don't want that shit.
Right.
Like, and any kind of violent revolution is going to be a time of upheaval and a time of, you know, a time in which shit can absolutely just go horribly, horribly wrong, especially if the movement is co-opted by sort of authoritarian or fascist elements.
Right.
And I don't see the ideological grounding in society to prevent that from happening currently, especially in the United States. I think if there was any kind of violent revolution, it would be very, very likely to be to go the way of more reactionary rather than liberatory forces.
I agree with you. I agree with you completely.
And so, sorry,
no, go for it.
one last little preach, I guess. And so, if you want to try and create this utopia, you have to start by creating that ideological grounding, which means that you have to start by engaging with your local community and pushing people towards a philosophy of cooperation rather than competition, of working together and trying to bring people together in the acceptance that their neighbors are people just like them and deserve the same basic rights that they do.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
You've got to do that. And I don't know. I always advocate for, like, you know, either get involved with your local sort of one of your local anarchist groups that does do like social services, like you know, soup runs, or what do you call them in the States, like a soup kitchen?
Yeah, soup
right?
kitchen.
Or
or
canned food drives, or, you know, or even better, get together with a few of your friends and just go fucking door knocking. And just go, hey, we're just a small collective that like to try and solve problems in the community. We'd like you to tell us about, like, what kind of problems you have living here. And, you know, we're gonna have a meeting on Saturday or whatever, and try and work out how we can maybe try and fix some of these as a community, because it seems like the government isn't doing anything about, like, the garbage down the alley from your house or the fucking potholes in the road up the way, you know?
Right.
Like, And if we get together and pool our resources, maybe we can do something about that and make everybody's life a little bit easier. I think that you can possibly get people to engage with that.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it's got to come from the community. It's got to come from the bottom up. And if you if you eventually want some kind of fucking revolution, I mean, hopefully, if you do that, you might not even need any kind of violent revolution, right? Because you're changing the psychology of the nation.
Right.
But you know, if you're still one of those hardcore violent revolution type fucking people, it's going to be a lot more successful if you're doing it when most of the country is already engaging with sort of the idea of cooperation over competition and sort of vaguely anarchistic organizing structures and so on.
Yeah, and like Neko-chan 816, like, yeah, door knocking can be scary, but I think it's a little bit easier if like you're doing it in your own neighborhood. You know, these aren't necessarily strangers. You know, you want to be able to build your local community, your local coalition. You know.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one fucking suggestion. I think that this is a good way to like maybe try and start up some sort of anarchistic group within your local community.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to use the words socialist or anarchist or communist. In fact, they'll probably scare most people away. It's just community organizing, you know, in order to make people's lives better. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, you know, fucking churches and conservatives, they love that shit. They fucking love that shit. Let's do some charity. Let's have a yard sale or whatever for the local school, or you know, depending on where you live. There's conservatives are all about community.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least they say they are.
Right.
Again, depending on where you live. Rural conservatives, definitely.
Exactly. I know, and you know what? I've heard this said, and I think it's pretty true. Like, just the conservative sense of community is just different than the like the more lefty sense of community, right? Like, people on the right have just a smaller sense of community, and so maybe part of how you can get to them is just by broadening what they consider part of their community. You know?
Yeah, you live in my neighborhood. I live in your neighborhood.
Yeah.
Let's help each other out.
Exactly.
Gonna have a barbecue on Sunday, and we're gonna talk about we're gonna try and raise a little bit of money to fix the potholes in the road. Fucking done, son.
Yeah.
You know?
Conservatives hate potholes.
You just did an anarchism. Congratulations. You know? And nobody had to say the word anarchism. Nobody had to say revolution. Nobody had to dress up in black bloc. But you did an anarchism.
I mean, you could dress up in black bloc.
Community outside of the state to address problems that you all face. In the loosest possible sense of
right.
But yeah, that's the basis, right? That's the very basic fundamentals. And unfortunately, in America, like 99% of people don't have any idea of those fundamentals, because you're such an individualistic society. Right. We are over here in the United Kingdom as well. I would say in the United States more, I've only visited a few times, and I went to Wisconsin, so who knows what it's like in other parts of the country.
Yeah, Wisconsin's a bit weird.
People just don't talk to each other, really. You don't talk to your neighbors. Like,
yeah, that might be a Midwest thing, though. Like a lot of I'm not sure. You know, a lot of people in the Midwest are just kind of like, it's polite to mind your business, you know, like. But then they'll gossip to death, you know. So you know, is it really?
Do they really believe that?
Yeah, exactly.
Just keep your mouth shut and don't cause problems. Don't create waves.
Yeah,
that's what it is, basically. It's that liberal sensibility of like order, isn't it?
Yeah, something like that. There's also like I don't know, like there are regional like sayings, like like Minnesota nice or whatever, and like I'm not sure how
Minnesota nice. I know that from Fargo.
Yeah, I'm from Minnesota, so we get it all the time.
Hey, I can think of worse shows that could represent where you live. Honestly,
I mean,
does
yeah,
present Minnesota as being a pretty cool place to be.
it's pretty cool. Yeah. I don't mind it. I don't mind it. I'll put it that way.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I guess like how when it comes to these cultic movements,
Mhm.
how do they how do they gain traction after they start, right? Like how does someone who's like, yeah, an alien is communicating to me in my head, like basically get started, you know? I'm still a bit like confused about these origins.
Um, that's a really fair question. Usually, it's at least from the few that I've studied, things like Jonestown and Onshinrikyo in Japan, and it tends to be a few sort of like stop and starts,
Mm-hmm.
you know, or like, and there's a lot of turmoil in the beginning before they sort of like settle down and solidify into something. Um, but I don't know. It seems relatively potluck as to who's going to attract a large amount of followers.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I couldn't give you a definitive answer on that. But it does seem like they go through this period of trial and error, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and especially if you're talking about like a charismatic cult leader, somebody like Jim Jones or Shoko Asahara.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about somebody who does have some very sort of like specific personality traits. They're already pretty controlling. They're already pretty charismatic. They're very good at getting people to, you know, follow them and understanding which people are vulnerable to their forms of manipulation, either consciously or instinctively. They just kind of are good at that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I don't think it's not everybody who says I talk to aliens is going to start a cult. I think it requires a
Okay, that's
particular
fair.
kind
Yeah.
of yeah, it requires a particular kind of personality and the dedication to keep that shit up for a long period of time.
Yeah.
It's it requires a very specific kind of mentality. I mean, if especially if they know that they're talking out of their ass, if they know that they're bullshitting,
Mm-hmm.
like how long could you keep up a lie like that? Like, and surround yourself with people who believe it.
Yeah.
Imagine how high stress that situation is. You know, um,
Yeah, I
as a
guess I
as a
hadn't
regular person,
hadn't
yeah.
thought about it that way.
Well, it's super fucked up, isn't it?
Yeah.
Imagine that you've got like a whole bunch of people following you who think that the end of the world is coming and then you're going to usher in a new beautiful world. Um, and you've primed them to commit like pretty horrible acts, you know, suicide or in the case of Shoko Asahara, like full on fucking terror attacks and trying to put together like a nuclear arsenal at one point. Um, like if they ever sort of turned on you, that's it, you know?
Yeah.
Like they'd probably just rip you to shreds. Like it's a really high stress environment and I don't think that everybody would be suited to it. So yeah, I think it's probably specific it's very specific kinds of personalities mixed with a whole bunch of other shit. Yeah.
Okay.
But I in the case of QAnon, they had help, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, they had the internet. You had the moderators on 4chan and stuff pushing it. You had YouTubers who sort of like were in contact with those moderators that started making, you know, just pumping out videos and content around it. Um, and so it had a good marketing campaign.
Right.
Had a very good marketing campaign.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It, it's weird thinking of these in terms of like marketing, but yeah, like absolutely. I'm sure QAnon needs good marketing, I guess.
Mm.
Um
But also, like, I mean, it just like we said earlier, it also just tapped into it was a good product as well.
mhm.
It tapped into a lot of things that people already believed. Um, yeah, and just sort of like took them a step further and then pulled them into this big old Katamari ball.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
The Katamari.
so it's an excellent product with some really good marketing.
Mm-hmm.
That's essentially what happened there in the marketplace of ideas.
Ah, yes, the marketplace of ideas. It's the classic.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I probably one of the biggest pieces of proof that the marketplace of ideas doesn't necessarily always produce the best products.
Yeah, it's not the best. No.
Yeah, just like any marketplace, in fact.
Exactly.
Yeah, which is why market socialism sucks.
Oh, I don't know. We've had markets prior to capitalism, right? I just don't think we should apply markets to everything.
Yeah, yeah. That's reasonable. I'm not gonna get in a fight with you over market socialism. I just love taking these little digs.
Aw.
I'm always shitting on Graugot for being like a Chomsky syndicalist, you know, and he's about as close to me as anybody. So I'm just like, oh, we have an ideological difference, do we? Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I'm also aware that there's just far too many lefties out there who are like, oh, we have a small ideological difference. You're dead to me.
Yeah, time for me to go to war, I guess.
Gulag!
Get the gulag.
Get the gulag. That's it. Fucking Ansin versus Ancom. Yeah, you get the wall. Yeah. It's dumb. It's dumb. And I think it's born of what I was saying earlier about like people just being very sort of like theory driven and online rather than engaging in actual activism.
Yeah.
The kind of shit I was talking about earlier, you know, you'd be working with people who have absolutely no fucking idea what an anarcho-syndicalist is.
Right.
Like, and you should be, because those are the people that, you know, those are the people that you're trying to help. Those are the people that you're trying to like work with. You can't just get together with you and the 5 other anarcho-syndicalists you can find in your state. You know, what are you going to do by yourselves?
Why
Like,
not?
Yeah.
5 people can do it.
Om Shinrikyo. Sorry, somebody asked in your chats now. I'm gonna have to say.
That's okay. Yeah, go for it.
Shinrikyo. They were the Japanese cult that carried out the Tokyo subway sarin gas attack. That was their the thing they were most famous for.
Mm-hmm.
They released sarin on the Tokyo subway and they killed a bunch of people and injured hundreds more. It was the worst terror attack in Japanese history since the war. And they were a cult that was led by a guy called Shoko Asahara, who was like this. He was blind. His followers liked to wear papier-mâché masks of him.
Yeah, super normal stuff.
Yeah. He sort of started out doing yoga and then traditional Chinese medicine and stuff, and graduated into like full-on cult leader, and told his followers that he was the Christ and wanted to bring about a new world, bring about the millennium through the destruction of the old world by trying to incite a war between America, Russia, and Japan. And originally he wanted to do this through nuclear weapons, and didn't quite manage to get together the resources to create a nuke. So moved to chemical weapons instead, and and they unleashed an attack on the Tokyo subway. Prior to that, they also attacked an apartment building. That's less often spoke about because it didn't kill as many people, but it did happen. And Shoko Asahara was eventually executed in 2018, so just 2 years ago.
Is he like a fringe case of like Japanese execution? I'm not sure about the status of that in Japan.
They do still execute people. I don't think they do it like super regularly. Not as much as the United States. Although the United States is
we do love our executions.
Down on that too, right?
Yeah.
Capital punishment in Japan. I mean, they don't seem to be doing They don't seem to do it often. It seems to be like, yeah, here's the Wikipedia page anyway. They say death penalty is usually reserved for cases of multiple murders, though some single murderers have been executed in extraordinary cases like torture, torture murder, or kidnap for ransom.
Okay.
I'm not sure how popular it is. Here's some recent ones. Shoko Asahara is top of the list, by the way. 6th July 2018. That's Shoko Asahara and the members of the Om Shinrikyo cult that were killed on 6th of July, 26th of July.
Gotcha.
Yeah. It's pretty mad. But yeah, so not a lot, it seems like, according to this article. They don't seem to do it much. But they kept them all alive until there were no more appeals for any of them.
Okay.
Shoko Asahara apparently just was locked in a cell and lost his mind, according to the prison guards. Although it's hard to say. It's hard to say for sure what his mental state was, because nobody was really allowed to visit him. His daughter tried to visit him a number of times, and they said he wouldn't come out of his cell. But we just don't know how truthful the guards were being, honestly.
Right.
Yeah, it's one of those things. But yeah, and they do their executions by hanging, which is also kind of unusual in terms of executions. We don't the US doesn't hang people anymore, as far as I know, except in a couple of states, and it's the choice of the prisoner, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
They can choose to be hung. And most other countries that use more physical methods tend to use things like beheading. So hanging's actually kind of a rarity, whereas once it was super common, right?
Wow. Okay.
I know they hung Saddam Hussein.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And I think most of us have seen the video of that. That's fucked up.
That's pretty fucked up, isn't it? We do like to pretend that we're so civilized, right?
Yeah. Well, America does still execute people. It's still pretty horrible.
Yeah, we're yeah.
I don't know. America didn't carry out the hanging of Saddam Hussein. That was that was Iraqi, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, it was the Iraqi American-backed new government. Yeah, I don't know enough about it. I'm probably just talking out my ass. I should shut up about that one.
It's all
I'm
good.
just being irresponsible. But but yeah. All I know is he got hung, and it wasn't the United States what did it, although it might have been a United States-backed government. Yeah, fuck, I forgot what we were talking about now.
Just you were talking about the cult.
Oh, the Om Shinrikyo thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I pretty much said all I needed to say. I mean, they also had streaks of anti-Semitism in their beliefs. Shoko Asahara declared himself the Christ in his book, Declaring Myself the Christ.
Oh, that's subtle.
Imaginatively titled book, yeah. They had an anime series.
What?
Yeah, the cult made an anime. That was all about
strange.
Shoko Asahara and him levitating and stuff like that. They had some weird kind of their ideology was a weird mix of Buddhism and Christianity and a whole bunch of other shit. And they used these helmets that they put on people to try and get them to connect with Shoko Asahara. Mm-hmm. Basically, part of the philosophy of the cult was that you could meditate to become one with another person, right? So you lose your identity entirely and become one with the person that you're sort of trying to, you become one being. And to this end, they employed these helmets, which which basically just provided electric shocks to your head,
Cool.
which they put on their kids and stuff to help their kids become enlightened and cause them some damage sometimes.
Jeez.
Yeah. I mean, there was and they believed that Shoko could levitate. That was a cool one. Could levitate. He was the Christ, and you could become one with him through putting on a helmet that shocked you. So, yeah, they were pretty mad. They stood for election. It's one of the things that I sometimes bring up when we're talking about QAnon is that they stood for election. I think they had. I want to say they had 12 candidates, but I might be well off. I know there's a 2. There's a 2 in the number of candidates that they had. Okay.
Okay.
They got completely fucking laughed out, and none of them were elected because they were all pretty fucking insane. Like,
yeah, probably hard to like hold down a stable government position.
I mean, if you see how they were on the campaign trail, you know, you have their followers like walking around in these like paper mache heads of Shoko Asahara. Try and find one. Yeah, here we go. Look at this shit. Copy image address.
Oh, here, send it in Discord, then I can post it.
Oh, I put it in the chat, but there you go.
Oh, so, that is bizarre. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And you know, the Japanese are pretty weird. They love their mascots and stuff, but this was fucking weird to them as well. So, they just didn't. They didn't get elected. They were considered very, very fucking strange. That's why I find it disturbing that QAnon are getting people elected. You know.
Yeah, right. And I.
Because those
entirely...
when sorry, no, you go.
I was gonna ask, is it entire like is the fact that like QAnon rhetoric is largely in line with basically where current Republican rhetoric is that like part of what makes it so successful?
Well, you know, QAnon is the GOP is like swung towards QAnon as well, right?
Oh yeah, hard.
Like,
yeah.
So they're kind of meeting each other in the middle a bit.
That's nice of them.
I mean, the GOP's always had this kind of, I don't know. I don't want to sound like a batshit crazy lefty, but I think that the GOP has like for quite a while had a bit of a fashy streak. You know?
Oh yeah, no, I've done videos on my channel about how they like hit. I mean, like Donald Trump is
especially when it comes to like LGBT folks and black folks, like definitely, and that appeals to like a fundamentalist Christian base. And of course, there's this huge core of QAnon that like is very fundamentalist Christian.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, don't get me wrong. I know I said it. I think I said it a lot earlier, so maybe some people who are here right now might not have. But like there are a range of ways that people get sucked into QAnon, and not everybody is like a fundamentalist Christian. Some are weird New Agey type people, some are health and well-being type people, and so on. But there is definitely a huge group of QAnoners that are like fundy Christians. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, you said something earlier that was pretty interesting to me. How does like going to yoga class, how does that work as an intake for cults?
Well, I was actually specifically referring to like Om Shinrikyo at that point.
Oh, okay.
Because it started off with like yoga studios and this sort of weird Vedic philosophy, which was all about like, you know, the oneness with another person and all this shit. Mm-hmm. There's other people who've studied Om Shinrikyo in much greater depth than I have, who would be able to explain it better. But yeah, essentially that started out as a yoga studio. And,
gotcha.
And there's a lot of, even in Western yoga nowadays, there's a lot of kind of weird new agey fucky stuff, right? Like, yeah,
Yeah.
getting your chakras
I was
aligned.
just gonna say I gotta align my chakras for this conversation.
Yeah, yeah. And so with that comes sort of this trust of alternative medicines and this distrust of quote unquote big pharma,
Mm-hmm.
which is another very easy sort of gateway into QAnon.
Interesting. So like, so I guess like, is there a way to decouple these things? Is there a way to make yoga class safe for your white suburban mom?
Yoga is never safe, especially for white suburban mums. Those people are dumb as shit, and they will get sucked into any conspiracy theory you feed them. Actually, you know what's like, yeah, like the crystal mums and shit.
Yeah,
Um, uh, one of the weird things
crystal
about
mums.
QAnon that I think deserves more study and more analysis is that it probably has produced like proportionately the largest number of like female or women terrorists, right? Women committing extremist acts in the name of the cult,
Really?
because typically extremists and people who carry out terror attacks tend to be male.
Mm-hmm.
And in QAnon, there's a huge group of women. The person who went after I mentioned the attempted assassination of Joe Biden with a car full of knives. That
Mm-hmm.
was a woman. You know, a lot of the kidnappings associated with QAnon have been women, and so QAnon is motivating women to commit extremism at an unprecedented rate. I think that probably deserves a little bit more analysis and understanding of like why women seem to be uniquely vulnerable to this.
Is it because of like the association with like children or protecting children? Is it
I think
would that be
probably, yeah.
enough? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, right.
Usually these communities are pretty hostile to women, so it is kind of strange how women have been
Mm.
incorporated into it.
Well, it's splinters, you know? It's a decentralized cult. I
Right.
mean, it kind of has its sort of like central information factory. Um, but then there's all these different kind of groups. All those entry points
Hmm.
have their own individual kind of like little groups, right? They're not all sitting in a compound somewhere. So you got
Right.
your QAnon wellness mums that all meet and talk about this shit. And then you've got your 3%ers that talk about this shit. And obviously the 3%ers group is like basically all dudes and obviously the QAnon moms.
Hmm.
Like, yeah, the crystal healing yoga ladies, like that's very strongly women. So
Right. This is interesting because earlier you were talking about like how like one of the ways to get people out of these movements is is like through like life decisions and life choices. I I feel like it's actually harder to get through to like a crystal wine mum who's bought into this, right? Like, because
yeah.
where's the point at which they're like, yeah, this is absolutely batshit, and I need to get my life back, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's supposed it depends on how damaging it is to their life,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like I've heard a lot of horror stories of people whose parents have like fallen into QAnon and now they just spend literally all fucking day on the computer, like you know, tweaking out, waiting for the next Q drop, right? Like doom
Right.
scrolling through shit, and all they ever talk about is Q. And if it's affecting their life to that extent, you know, obviously they're hurting themselves, they're hurting their family, and they could possibly be a danger to others as well
Mm-hmm.
because they could be potentially motivated towards extremist action.
Right.
Um, but if it's just that, like, your yoga mom thinks that there's probably a secret cabal that traffics children, but she doesn't really do anything about it, and she doesn't really talk about it an awful lot, like, how much is that harming her? Like, I'm not sure if there's, like, I mean, obviously, she has the potential to radicalize other people and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I don't know if that particular belief is harming her any more than like the idea that amethysts can fucking make you feel more energized. I don't know,
Yeah.
right? Like, because she's not doing anything with it. It's not affecting her in any great way. She just believes something dumb and stupid.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's only the point at which it starts really infringing upon her life that you would then start thinking, well, I need to employ some kind of measure to get her to take part in normal everyday activities. Because if she's already still taking part in those, then this particular strategy is not going to work anyway.
Right.
Anyway, this has been fun.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I've talked your ear off. But it was
Yeah,
nice.
I've really enjoyed it. I've learned a lot. Thank you very much.
Well, you know, if I get a chance to talk about QAnon and cults and shit, I'll rant for ages. That's why that's what I enjoy.
Yeah.
Because I'm a fucked up individual, apparently.
Yeah,
And
we
also
all are.
I just want to. I really wish I could find an answer to that question though. Of like, how do we just? Yeah, I just want to be able to reach in, grab some of these people. I've got some recordings, and I'll probably put them in a video later. But I've got some recordings of. So we talked about how people can lose their family members to this shit, right?
Mhm.
And I talked about QAnon casualties, that Reddit, that you know, a lot of people sharing their stories about how their family members no longer spend any time with them, or when they do, they're just ranting about satanic pedophiles. And I wondered what it was like from the other side, basically. So I tried to steer the conversation in that way while I was in a Zoom chat with some more evangelical QAnoners. And I have recordings of them. Literally, like 4 or 5 people from the group decided that they were quite happy and really wanted to share their story about being sort of rejected by their family members, or not spending as much time with their family members anymore. And they were in tears, you know, they were fucking crying and shit. And I'm just sitting there bloody heartbroken because, like, one, I can't really kind of push anything particularly hard because then I'd just lose access to the group, right? Like
Right.
any kind, I don't want to like taint the any material or evidence or whatever that I get from the group. I don't want to taint it with my own influence. I don't want to influence people to extremism either. And I just, you know, you just keep a low profile and generally are a fly on the wall.
Mhm.
So I'm just fucking heartbroken because I can't do or say anything that's going to make them feel any better, that's going to make them realize that the path they're going down is what's causing them all this pain. There's nothing I can do.
Is there
And
no
so
introspection on their parts? Or
no, they believe that they're right, and that when the Great Awakening happens, all their family members are gonna go, oh shit, Grandma was right, and they're gonna come to her for advice, you know.
Mhm.
And I mean, you and I, we know that that is extremely unlikely to ever happen. And so poor Grandma's just stuck in this fucking space where the rest of the family just doesn't talk to her anymore.
Mhm.
And that's awful. And she's there crying her eyes out like, oh yeah, I've lost a son because, yeah. And so I wish I had an answer to that question of like, how do we just reach in and pull somebody out of this shit?
Mhm.
I wish there was an easy answer to that, and that's something that I'm searching for all the time, is just like ways in which we can prevent more people from being hurt and pulled in, and how to get other people out. And unfortunately, there's a lot smarter people who've been doing this for a lot longer than I have, who have, only a few more of the answers than I do.
Right.
It's not an easy thing to deal with. This level of, like, I don't know what you'd call it, like social contagion, I guess. Like, it's an infection that's deeply ingrained in our societies for hundreds of years, and it's been exacerbated, I think, by the social media age, and I don't think we're going to get rid of it anytime soon. It's not an easy or quick path.
How did you get into this, by the way? Was it to find an answer to that question?
Oh, I really liked punching Nazis.
Can you expound on that?
Yeah, sure. Oh shit. Now, I was like, I grew up in care. I grew up in a children's home. And I didn't get out much because we weren't really allowed out without adult supervision for most of my childhood, which led to me not having that much of a social group. So when I finally left the children's home, I joined. Well, actually, it was before I left, but anyway, I started hanging out with these punk dudes, and nothing clicked for me. I just thought they were edgy shits, basically. Even when one of my friends wrote a song for his girlfriend called "Lipstick Nazi Girl," like nothing clicked. I was just like, that's kind of edgy, like lol lol lol. You know, he turns up in his FS uniform for his birthday party, and I'm like, that's funny. You know, good aesthetic, love the leather. And then I'm walking around town with them one day, and this Muslim couple walked by, and they just fucking started screaming at them. Like, you're fucking, one of my friends like threw his bottle at them, and I didn't know what to fucking make of it. Because, you know, I mean, I'd known a few people of color growing up, not an awful lot, but I never really had anything against them as a group, and I was just like, these just two people, like, what the fuck, they haven't done anything. You know.
Yeah.
I was that oblivious, you know. I was institutionalized. I grew up in institutions, so I was very naive. And after that, I was just like, I don't want to hang around with these people anymore. They're fucking assholes. Like,
Yeah.
you know, I regret to this day that I didn't do anything to stop the abuse that this couple were suffering. I mean, it basically stopped as they walked down the road. It was only a short thing. But I really, like, nowadays, obviously, I'd be like, hey, fuck you, like, stop that, right?
Yeah.
But like, I was completely blown away. I had no idea what the fuck was going on. So I didn't want to hang out with those dudes anymore, and I ended up like falling in with this group of like skinheads instead, who also used to enjoy punk music and rock and metal and stuff, and they turned out to be like Sharp dudes. For anyone who doesn't know, Sharp is Skinheads Against Racial Prejudice, so they're like an anti-fascist
The good kind of skinheads.
Yeah, an anti-fascist movement within the skinhead subculture. And yeah, I hung around with them for ages, and we would go to protests and rallies and all sorts of shit. And for the longest time, all I knew was I fucking hate Nazis, because they are fucking dicks. Like, I fucking hate Nazis, and it didn't have anything to do with like any sort of like solid political ideology. I mean, obviously that's a very political thing that we're doing, but like, I had no solid ideology other than Nazis are dicks, and I don't fucking like them. And
fair.
Yeah. So but then I got ill. I had a bit of a mental breakdown, basically. I still have a really savage, like, panic disorder and anxiety disorder. And I developed agoraphobia, and it meant that I couldn't engage in that kind of like street activism anymore, basically. And so I started taking shit online. When you take shit online, it's a lot different than kind of on the street kind of, you know, you turn up to a protest, you stand around a bit, wait for the Nazis to show up, kick the shit out of some people, then go home, you know? But once you start taking that stuff online, and you're like doing all of this is a recount of history, by the way. I'm not advocating for anybody to follow in these actions.
Yep.
But the fact of the matter is that when you take that online, you start doing like doxing and all that sort of stuff, information collecting and so on, and you become a lot more aware of like the political circles that people are involved in and the ideologies and stuff that they're involved in. And for the longest time, it was still just like, I fucking hate Nazis. I'm just doing this because I fucking hate Nazis, and I want to stop them from being able to, like, you know, turn up in people's towns. And here in the United Kingdom, we had to deal with the EDL and BNP a lot. And they would literally just turn up in a town, get really fucking drunk, smash a load of windows, beat up the local, like, Muslim store owners or what have you. There was a few instances where they like firebombed their shops and stuff. So it was really just like, I fucking hate these dudes. They show up in a town, they're fucking horrible. I want to stop them being able to do that. But then I kind of got pulled into a few chats with some people who were working on like de-radicalization, basically. And I think that was the point at which I was just like, I started learning a lot about how people get pulled into these kinds of movements. I started formulating a more sort of anarchist philosophy and a recognition of like, you know, the like a more sort of determinist philosophy in terms of like why people make the decisions that they do, becoming aware of social pressures and all that sort of stuff. And as my ideology developed, I guess, like, in my worldview and my understanding of how things function and how people get pulled into these movements, I developed a lot more of an interest in like trying to understand how to like pull people out from movements like that and stuff. And I've been working on like QAnon and flat Earth and stuff for like the last year and a half, 2 years. But prior to that, it was pretty much all anti-fascist far right stuff that I was doing.
Okay.
I've actually taken a step back from that since I started making content online, because making too much content about groups like I don't know, I guess defunct ones now, like Atom Waffen and the Base and stuff like that. Yeah, I can mention those because like they won't have a go at me. But being a public figure where it's like really fucking easy to dox, like I think like QAnon and cults and stuff are like a little bit safer than like full on fucking Nazis to be talking about on a public stage.
Right. Yeah.
And I guess like just for my whole life, I've always had like a bit of a fascination with like people who think differently than me. I kind of like, I spent a while doing the douchey atheist thing for a while, you know?
Yeah.
And I was always obsessed with like serial killers too, and watching interviews with serial killers, because I couldn't put myself in their shoes. Like I couldn't understand why the fuck they did what they did.
Yeah, what
like
makes
how
them tick.
a human being could bring themselves to do that thing, the kind of mindset they'd have to be in, and so on. And I suppose that fascination exists to this day as well. Like when I'm in these groups with the QAnon people doing the Zoom calls and stuff, like I'm constantly trying to see things from their point of view, like trying to understand the reality that they live in. Try and explore, I guess, the reality that they exist in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess there you go. That's how I ended up doing this shit.
So, do you know, seeing as you've spent a whole lot of time around Nazis and dealing with Nazis, do you find that there's any truth to like there's like the common online saying of like, oh well, you know, you start calling other people Nazis, and pretty soon everyone who disagrees with you is a Nazi.
Right. I'm very I was a little bit throwaway earlier when I was like, I fucking hate Nazis. You know, I was memeing a little bit there. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that the EDL is like a neo-Nazi group. I mean, they spawned Combat 18, which is like well recognized as a neo-Nazi terror group now. So like, I don't think there's anything wrong with classifying them as like neo-Nazi. But I usually try and be very specific. And that comes from like the time that I did spend collating information on white supremacists, and because if you release a dox on a person or what have you, usually it's to warn a local community that they have like a Nazi in their midst. It's to try and get that person like fired from their job and ostracized from their community, basically, which significantly reduces their ability to like recruit or organize, because they lose their source of income and they lose their respect within the community. And so, but when you do that sort of thing, you have to be very what would I say, like, you have to include as much fucking information as possible to support the claim that this person is a bad person that the community needs to be aware of. And so you want to be as accurate as possible in the kind of words you use to describe them, i.e. fascist, white supremacist, neo-Nazi, whatever, right? Like I probably won't use the term Nazi for somebody unless they have like a relatively anti-Semitic streak, right? Like if it's I won't use the word like white supremacist for somebody if they're sort of like a civ nat, right? Like, um, yeah, I think it's very important to make sure that you're using the right words in the moment, because it's very easy for people to, or rather, I say it's very easy. People just want to believe that there aren't any fucking Nazis,
Yeah.
right? And so when you call somebody a Nazi, you want to have evidence that they have Nazi-esque beliefs, that they are white supremacists who with a strong anti-Semitic streak.
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of like, that's my bar for calling somebody a Nazi, is somebody
Yeah.
who is a white supremacist, fascist with an anti-Semitic streak. Yeah. And if all those things are in place, I'll feel comfortable calling them a Nazi, but not until that point. So, like Enrique Tarrio, for example, of the Proud Boys, I'm not going to call him a Nazi, right? I think Enrique Tarrio is probably best classified as like a civic nationalist. I think it's perfectly okay to call the Proud Boys as an organization kind of fashy. But like, I'm not gonna call Enrique a Nazi.
Right.
So no, I think getting involved in those circles makes you more likely to be more careful with how you use these words, rather than less careful. I think it's like your Twitter libs that are very liberal with the use of the word Nazi, as opposed to actual anti-fascists who spend time combating them.
Also, William of Orange, you are definitely saying some stupid shit in chat. I just need to vocalize that because what you're saying is making me irritated. Anyway.
Wait, who's saying irritating things?
William of Orange, he's our local conservative in chat, who, you know,
and he's
if
called
you start...
William of Orange, which is super fucking amazing.
If you start calling people Nazis, everyone's going to be a Nazi who disagrees with you, and that, like, you were then strawmanning other people's opinions in chat, my dude. You like.
I think the problem is that, like, some people who you could call Nazis, it's very easy. It's like, a lot of people don't, like I said earlier, want to believe that there are any Nazis. And their standard of evidence for like who's a Nazi is like so ridiculously high that it means that no Nazis could possibly exist now.
Yeah.
And the people who repeat the claim that this person is a Nazi don't have the wealth of evidence that the person who's made the first ID has to hand, you know? And so it's like, oh, you know, such and such person's a Nazi. It's like, oh, well, why are they? Like, did you see the History Channel thing a little while ago?
No, I don't have cable.
That was fucking hilarious. So there was this, the History Channel had this fucking game show going. Yeah, the History Channel doesn't do enough history anymore, because they suck. I mean, they did Ancient Aliens, right? Anyway, so they had this game show going that was about, like, I don't know, it was like DIY wood cutting or wood carpentry or some shit. And the one of the main people, one of the main contestants, just had like this face full of fucking tattoos, right? And they posted the trailer for this show on Twitter, and instantly anti-fascists started going, "Hey, this guy has a lot of Nazi tattoos." I mean, like, these aren't just tattoos, they're Nazi tattoos. He's got like 14 on his chin and 88 on the top of his fucking head. He's got the you know,
Jesus Louise.
yeah. And I forget which one it was. What was it? It was like 19, oh fucking hell, my brain's just squish at the moment. It was but yeah, so the History Channel apparently went and asked this dude, like, wait, are your tattoos Nazi tattoos? Because there's a lot of people saying they're Nazi tattoos. And he's like, no, my dad died in whatever it was. It's like
1488, yeah.
Yeah. Like, I don't know. It was just like, and they came back and they made this whole fucking statement. They were like, we vet our competitors very, very carefully, and we can tell you that he is not in fact a Nazi and that his dad died. Like, it's just like, so people don't want to fucking believe this shit, even when it's tattooed on people's faces, you know? Like, trying to convince the average normie that the person they're dealing with is a Nazi is actually quite difficult.
Well, yeah, and like I've just found it's hard to convince people that fascism is a thing in the United States. Like, people are just
Yeah.
like, no, that's just a normal Republican. I'm like, no, they're supporting a guy who's running on an explicitly fascist platform, like by
Mm.
every
Well, the
metric.
far right have done a very, very good job of diluting the meaning of fascism, or making it appear as if the left are diluting the meaning of fascism.
Yeah,
The, oh, you'll just call everybody a fascist kind
yeah,
of thing. And sure, there are some dipshit libs who will play into that and just be like, you know, oh, such and such is a fascist or whatever. But if you actually dig down into it, you can definitely justify, like, 90% of the people you hear called fascists on Twitter, like, I don't know, chuck them my way. I'll probably be able to give you a pretty solid justification for why, like, what they're pushing is, like, relatively fashy.
yeah.
Like, yeah. Ben Shapiro, like, is a good example. A lot of people call Ben Shapiro a fascist. I try generally to avoid it because then you get into a huge fucking conversation about it. I could absolutely justify classifying Ben Shapiro as a fascist. The only difference between Ben Shapiro and your classical fascist is that Ben Shapiro isn't quite as anti-Semitic as like a full-on fucking Nazi.
But
Like,
he does like
he's
toe
still-
the line though between like
he does.
cultural Jews and like religious Jews.
Exactly, the
Yeah,
good Jews and the bad Jews.
yeah.
Yeah, he definitely does that. He's like tokenizes himself a bit. But like if you say to somebody like William of Orange in the chat that like Ben Shapiro is a fascist, like he's just going to reject that out of hand and be like the left just calls anybody they don't like a fascist, you know?
Yeah.
So I mean, it doesn't matter whether he's a grifter or not. Like, what matters is like the rhetoric that he uses, the ideas that he espouses, and so on. I guess the even better way to phrase it would be that Ben Shapiro pushes fascism.
Mm-hmm.
That he espouses fascist ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for
Yeah,
giving
okay,
us.
okay. Reject it out of hand because
Yeah.
it's not true. See, I mean, it's like
Gosh.
it's just proving my point, really.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, we can. You know, we'd have to have like this big long fucking conversation about all the things that Ben Shapiro has said, the kind of worldview that he's attempting to construct, this, you know, the protection of Western civilization and so on. Like, there's a lot of kind of like fascist threads that we'd have to go through in order to prove that, like, coherently, you pull all this shit together, like Ben Shapiro is pushing a kind of American neo-fascism.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and like here's the thing. Again, William of Orange, I haven't called you a fascist. You're a conservative. I don't know if you're a fascist or not. I've just made a large generalization because the Republican Party is 95% behind Trump. Like that, at least that's where his approval ratings were, and Trump is a fascist. He runs on a fascist platform. And like by most scholarly definitions of fascism, he would be considered a fascist.
So I actually had an email exchange with Robert Paxton, who is one of those historians who wrote the fucking book on fascism,
What's the
The
name of his
Anatomy
book?
of Fascism, right? Yeah.
What's the name of that book?
The Anatomy of Fascism.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. And he studied fascist movements of the sort of early to mid 20th century. We had an email back and forth about like whether he would be comfortable calling Trump a fascist. And I wouldn't call Trump a fascist for the longest fucking time. For about the first 2.5 years of his presidency, I had the inclination that he was using a lot of fascist rhetoric, and I had the inclination to say this is airing on fascism. It's really kind of it's freaking me out, but I would not go to the level of calling him a fascist because I'd spent time talking to and understanding experts on fascism who, like Robert Paxton, who informed me of some very important differences between like Trumpism and like classical fascism of the 20th century, mostly in terms of like economic libertarianism, right? Like when Trump's initial platform is like we're going to reduce regulations on private companies and all that sort of stuff, whereas like Hitler's fascism was a lot more restrictive.
Right.
So like I wouldn't go further than those experts, but like as as the veil has been pulled back and he's like abandoned a lot of those more libertarian economic policies and so on, and pursued with great fervor this what Paxton in his definition of fascism would call like a shit. I was going to quote him, then I forgot the quote. I suck. They pursued with great fervor this goal of internal cleansing and purity, which is the sort of foundation of pretty much all fascist movements, right? The purity of the Volk, the purity of the people, the in-group, right?
Oh yeah,
getting rid of all those impure elements.
He's been really hitting that lately.
Yeah, and as he and his base have pursued that with ever more fervor, I'm ever more comfortable saying that Trump is a fascist, you know. And I think if we allowed him to have another 4 years in power, I think it would be very difficult for even the libbiest of the libs to deny that. But you know, it's taken like 4 years for even the libs to come around to calling him a fascist. So, like, I don't think that anybody like jumped the gun in calling Trump a fascist. I think everybody was like, you know, pretty
they made every excuse for him.
Yeah, right. It's like Trump. He's not like he's bad, but he's not like, you know, he's not like Hitler bad. Like, you know, and
well, and like again, he doesn't have to be Hitler bad in order to be a fascist. I think that's a false like comparison that a lot of people make.
Yeah, yeah. It's like, oh, if you're not Hitler, then fuck it, anything goes, right? Oh well, he's not Hitler, so it's okay. Like,
yeah, exactly.
No, it's just it's dumb. And then you look at how he handled these protests. And you have to wonder the state that the United States would be in right now if you didn't have certain constitutional protections, right? If those were suddenly like stripped away, the lengths that Trump would go to, especially when it comes to like how he would have dealt with the protests, how he wanted to, how he said he wanted to deal with the protests.
Yeah.
And with Tom Cotton, that Waco ass fucking bitch, like advocating for the military to go onto the streets and literally start gunning people down. Like, you know, it's a really fucking scary time.
Yeah, and I mean, like Trump literally, if we didn't have these protections, right? If we didn't have the containment of our aged and decrepit institutions that are still, I guess, good enough at containing this man for 4 years, no, he was just straight up saying, like, let's not have an election this year.
Yeah.
Like, he came out and said it, guys.
And the amount of right-wingers that I have heard, like, over the last 6 to 8 months, and I'm not talking about like extreme right wingers that I see in fascist, like obviously fascist spaces. I'm talking about like average fucking conservatives that I've heard question whether or not democracy is a good idea. You know, like I just it seems everybody is sort of like teetering on the edge of just going full fucking authoritarian, honestly.
Yeah.
Especially the Trump crew. Like, they just fucking love that shit. They're like, fuck it. If we can't get... If you listen to, like, Nick Fuentes or whatever, he's doing the rounds right now, and he's basically, like... his criticism of Tucker Carlson, for example, was like, who the fuck cares about honest journalism right now? We are on the precipice. We can take over. But he's being a fucking quisling and, like, going over to the other side, you know? By asking for evidence of the things that Sidney Powell is claiming. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of these people, they just don't give a fuck about what's true. They're quite happy to, like, just go full-on totalitarian if it means that they keep their man in office. And that's scary as shit to me. So yeah, Trump is building a fascist movement within the United States, and if he were allowed to continue building it for another 4 years, I think you'd be looking at a very, very different situation come next election. I mean, look how fucked up this election is. Imagine how fucked up it could be in 4 years' time.
Yeah. So, this being the case, like Biden winning, etc. What do you think is like the future of like QAnon or QAnon adjacent movements? Either in the US or around the world. And also, William of Orange, just to clarify, the panel last night, the person who is the authoritarian is not a lefty. He's a well-known shit stirrer,
Oh,
essentially.
I thought just talking about me, isn't that? You mean Doobie?
Yeah, Doobie.
Yeah, fucking Doobie presides over the politics server, which like does have a lot of legitimate 1488 fuckers in. Like Doobie, I classify Doobie as one of those. If I'm being charitable to Doobie, and I've known him for a long time, I would classify him as one of those enlightened centrists who thinks that having these people into debate is the useful thing. You know, sunlight's the best disinfectant and all that sort of thing. That's how I would charitably characterize Doobie. But he's not a lefty. I'm a lefty, but I'm decidedly anti-authoritarian. Very anti-authoritarian. Yeah. Fuck. So yeah, your question was about like what now QAnon?
Yeah, where does it go from
Wherefore Q? And the answer to that is difficult to say, but if like previous movements that are similar like are any indication, I would say that for many people this is one of those tests of faith that I was talking about earlier, in which people tend to either fall away from the movement or dig themselves further into this ever more solid alternate reality. I do not think that this is like the end of QAnon. That would be a really, really silly thing to think. And also, QAnon exists independent of Trump in many countries around the world, where like Trump is not necessarily part of their central narrative.
Mm-hmm.
You know, even without Trump, the deep state still exists. All this means is that the deep state won. I mentioned earlier that under Democratic presidents, the membership of far-right extremist groups tends to spike.
Mm-hmm.
After all, you know, Clinton oversaw Waco and the Oklahoma City bombing and the rise of the militias, right? Like, it was a really, really spooky time under Clinton. And I don't expect that to be any different under Biden, especially considering how contested this election is, how there's a huge portion of the country that still believes, or at least purports to believe, that the election was stolen. And so then we get into like what happens when prophecies are unfulfilled. And what happened for Shinrikyo is that they tried to fulfill them, right? They first tried to bring about nuclear war, and then they when they couldn't make nukes, they moved to making biological weapons, and eventually did the sarin gas attacks and things.
Mm-hmm.
QAnon is a lot less centralized than Shinrikyo. And so I imagine what we will see is a rise in stochastic terror acts from QAnon adherents. I can't say how widespread or how severe that rise will be, but essentially people will like people get pushed to breaking point, right? After seeing so many prophecies go unfulfilled, like the storm is coming, the storm is here, the storm is here, oh, it's not here, the storm is here, oh, it's not here, the storm is here, oh, it's not here, and then Trump loses the election, and it feels like they're losing. You put yourself in their position, right? Their position is like, they're always being told, like, sit back and watch the show, trust the plan, right? But like, how many times can you tell somebody that that's happening, and that they should just sit back and let it play out before they decide that they've got to take some kind of action to take down these pedophiles, because nobody's actually doing it, because Q's failing them, you know? So I think it will inspire more people to take direct action to try and bring about that millennium, right? To try and bring about the fall of the cabal. And whatever that looks like for that individual, be it like, you know, the chap who shipped a load of fucking pipe bombs to random fucking Democrat officials.
Oh, yeah.
He wasn't QAnon, as far as I know. But like some of the things that he believed were definitely kind of like QAnon adjacent, right? So whether it be something like that, somebody shipping a load of pipe bombs to like George Soros and a bunch of Hollywood celebs and Democrats, or it be like specific assassination attempts or terror attacks or whatever. I honestly can't predict that, right? That's the whole point of like stochastic terrorism. You don't know when it's gonna happen, how
Right.
severe it's gonna be, and where it's gonna come from. All I can say is that I think that it increases the threat of stochastic terrorism, Trump losing the election. I still think it's better than Trump winning the election, because Trump winning the election puts them in power. It validates the QAnon theories that the GOP are embracing, and it gives them a lot more authority and validity, and perhaps they can do something on a more institutional level that eventually leads to some kind of democide.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah. So, I mean, my predictions are always pretty fucking doomer, and I always encourage people to seek out other people's opinions on this shit. There are a lot of people who have been doing this longer than me who speak about it with a lot more authority than I do. And I'd encourage you to seek out those people as well to get their opinions. But my opinion is that it dramatically increases the risk for stochastic terror.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I generally agree with that. Like, a lot of the I mean, I was worried about this going either way, like this election, when it comes to just acts of terror and attacks, because I feel like a lot of these QAnon people are kind of on the edge of their seats over like the pandemic, the economic pressures, the children who are not being saved, all of that. And and you're right. Like, on the one hand, I'm glad that Trump is out, because he himself was like engaging and egging people on to acts of stochastic terror too, right? Like, he specifically was calling for like the liberation of Michigan, which is part of why the people in the Michigan plot to kidnap their governor like decided to do it in the first place.
Yeah, and this isn't just QAnon, right? It's
Yeah.
like the entire sort of far right milieu. It's like they're all going to be motivated by this to more radical or extremist action.
Mm-hmm.
I think, anyway. And I think that the historical evidence supports my conclusion. It is indeed what informs my conclusion, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. It spooks me out. It spooks me out, and I really wish I wasn't like this doomer about stuff. I want to be more like, but I think it's going to get worse before it gets better, unfortunately. Yeah. The other thing I worry about is you've got groups like Omega Kingdom Ministries, which are still trying to set up orphanages for abused children.
Mm-hmm.
They're going through some of the legal process and the fundraising to do that now, and so I think we'll definitely, because if Trump loses the election, this sort of will cause a split in the ideology and the prophecy as well. Like, you know, maybe Trump will run in 2024. Maybe the deep state like fucked him over. Maybe this, maybe that. Like, what should we do in the meantime? Like, it's going to cause a lot of like ideological splits, and I think some of these could result in sort of compound type things springing up that are very QAnon informed. I mean, a lot of QAnon's managed to seep into a lot of militia groups as well, so you could get the kind of like militarized compound, which is spooky. But I'm a lot more worried about the kind of compound where you have like a bunch of fundamentalist evangelicals with a bunch of abused children who all believe some really crazy fucking shit, and there's a high potential for like abuse there as well. So I think the problems that this sort of detachment from reality, or this construction of an alternate reality, present for like American society are legion. There's a whole bunch of different ways in which they could go, and probably will go.
And I'm kind of curious at this point. Do you see any other like non-Q related cults coming up out of the United States, or is this going to be the kind of thing that just like hangs over us like some sort of ideological cloud and just kind of Katamari balls all these smaller conspiracies up into itself?
I think it depends on what you define as a cult. Oh geez. Because I mean, I would still define like white power as being cultic, you know? Like the full-on neo-Nazi shit is very fucking cultic, and it might not have to have any kind of like QAnon thing apart from being adjacent to it in the anti-Semitism. So, but you are right in that QAnon is so expansive now. It covers so many different sort of conspiracy theories that most of them are kind of like connected. There are a whole bunch of like smaller evangelical cults and stuff that have always been around, but I don't see any of them rising to the same degree of prominence as like QAnon does.
Okay.
QAnon has, yeah. But I also can't predict the future. Who the fuck knows, right? Like,
right, exactly.
Something else might take over. There might be some very, very weird splinter of QAnon that is almost that is so far removed from the initial thing that it's almost unidentifiable as being part of the same thing that then becomes really, really popular. Yeah, we're in that time of chaos now, where one of the big prophecies, the really, really big prophecies, hasn't come true. Trump didn't win the election, and depending on your point of view, that means the deep state won and are in control, and that's a lot of that means there's a conversation to be had between these people about what is to be done next. What kind of angle do we take? And I imagine people will split off on a lot of different kind of in a lot of different ways, with a lot of different ideas about what this means exactly. Yeah, and I can't say for sure what will eventually come of that. It's just a chaotic time.
True.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for giving us so much of your time. Where can people find you? Where can people find your content?
Oh, yeah, sure, I guess. Yeah, I'm Mixed Vivian Wulf on Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube. I will be posting the interviews I had with extremist researchers and stuff up on my YouTube pretty soon. I think the latest fucking interesting video on my YouTube is just literally me on Jesse Lee Peterson like a year ago. But there is going to be more stuff up there soon.
Okay.
And yeah, if you really want to know what I'm up to, I'd suggest like just following my Twitter. I also retweet a lot of those people that I mentioned earlier that have been doing this for longer than me and can speak with greater authority than me. And so if you're interested in the kind of topics that we've been discussing today, I think Twitter is probably the best place to follow me, because it will give you, my account's probably a nice jumping off point to learn more about these things from people who know more than I do. Yeah.
Well, awesome. Thank you very much for being here and just like hopping in.
It's no worries. I wanted to talk to you for a while. Like, it's always nice to see another trans person talking politics who isn't a complete dumbass.
Oh, thank you. I flatter myself thinking I'm not a complete dumbass.
I'm a complete dumbass, so don't worry about it. But yeah, no, I wanted to connect with you for a bit, so it's nice to do it. Maybe next time I can hear a bit more about you and a bit less about me.
Sure.
But
yeah.
want to get me started on cults and Q and shit, like.
Hey, the rabbit hole goes deep.
Yeah, it does. All right. Peace out, friendos. Thank you for being lovely, chat. Have a good night, Jack. Bye.
Oh, that was lovely. That was a lovely conversation. Viv is dope, Echoplex Media. Also, hello, Echoplex Media.